Would you lie to like save your children, your mom, your dad?
I don't think lying would save them.
No, can there ever be a circumstance logically that lying could save someone?
Yeah, and if you're steeped in sin, you're likely to live in circumstances like that.
I'll give you an example. If you're like in like Nazi Germany, and it is the case that there's like Jewish people in your attic and you're trying to protect them,
example.
would you lie to like the Nazis?
I would have done everything I bloody well could, so I wouldn't be in that situation to begin with. It's a hypothetical, and it's not answerable.
Hypotheticals?
No, I can't answer a hypothetical like that because
Did
it's
you eat
far.
today?
Look.
Did you
Don't play games.
I'm not playing games. I'm just asking if you ate it.
If you present me with an intractable moral choice that's stripped of context and you back me into a corner, you're playing game. I just told you I would do everything that I could to make sure that I'm never in that situation. By the time you've got there, you've made so many mistakes that there's nothing you can do that isn't a sin.
Jordan, how would you feel if you hadn't eaten breakfast?
Oh, no! No!
It's finally happened.
Oh, no. We cannot lose the great Jordan Peterson to the breakfast question.
What the hell is happening here, Sitch?
Oh my God.
Okay, so we got some crazy zoom in on this because obviously we're dealing with Jubilee, who strikes videos like crazy. So, but go ahead, finish your thought.
I like Jordan Peterson. Okay, we used to be dubbed the Jordan Peterson Internet Defense Squad back in the day.
We were stans. Right. We were big time Jordan Peterson stans.
Right, and I still like
Jordan
Peterson.
And then he went to the Daily Wire. Well, listen, and we were like, "Fuck, let's get off."
No. Listen, I still like him, even when we went to the Daily Wire and all this other stuff. You know, I don't agree with everything he says, but I still like him. But there's one issue that has always irked me, and I don't understand. I don't understand why he does what he does. And because we covered, it was the Sam Harris 4-hour truth conversation about, define what truth means. And whenever, for some reason, it comes to this question of defining whether you believe in God and whether he believes in God or all this other stuff, it just I feel like the conversation just breaks down into vagaries and confusing definitions and all these things that I don't think serve Jordan Peterson. Jordan Peterson is a smart person. He has good ideas. He has very interesting ideas. He has very interesting ideas about religion and God and his biblical series and all this other stuff. I want to be able to listen to what he's saying and understand him and not feel like he's sort of using some sort of word games to circumvent people's standard definitions of belief in God in these conversations.
Yeah, he's protecting his reputation, I think, a little bit too much. I think that gets under people's skin.
What do you mean by that?
He doesn't want to offend the Christians. And he knows that the Christians, his Christian fans, his Christian followers, they have a very different belief in God. And he doesn't want to offend those people. And I think if he came out and just clearly stated his belief in God, it would offend a lot of them. They'd be like, what? You mean God isn't real? He's not talking to me? He's not intervening in my daily life? He's not keeping me safe and sound?
Well, he makes the argument in this, it seems like, I think I have the time code, where he seems to be arguing that God is consciousness itself.
It's your conscience. It's what tells you right from wrong. But obviously, psychopaths.
Okay, like he means Jiminy Cricket. Essentially.
Yes, exactly. That's a great way to put it. Yeah. So obviously, psychopaths who don't have this conscience, well, they're true atheists, then, right?
Right.
He solved his Raskolnikov problem. Yeah, but
if he believes that, then he believes in God. If that's his argument, and that's what I'm just saying. Just say that clearly. Just say that easily. I believe God is the voice of morality in your mind or something.
Yeah, but people are not going to like that. The voice of your voice of morality didn't create the universe, right?
I see. You think you think he thinks that God is some sort of moral force that whispers into people's minds, but didn't create the universe?
Well, as soon as you go down this path, we can start interrogating his belief in God, right? What he thinks God is. He just doesn't want to go down that path. Because look, my immediate follow-up question is, so your conscience created the universe? I mean, he might say something like, well, it created your moral universe or our social moral universe. I mean, there's all kinds of different ways that you could do that, but that's not the God people believe in. The God people believe in is Superman, who can come in and save you from any problem that you have in your life. And that's a good thing, right? Because who doesn't want to have Superman as their co-pilot, right?
Sure.
You can't get in any trouble if Superman is your co-pilot. So when he reduces God to this, oh yeah, it's Jiminy Cricket. You're like, what? Jiminy Cricket's not going to save me when my wife gets cancer, or my kids are in trouble with the law, right? I want someone I can turn to that's going to help.
It would be interesting because I've never heard someone make the argument that they think God is the collective moral force in the universe, or at least in humanity, that guides morality on a human level. Because I believe that's what he means. Like if he believes it's like Jiminy Cricket, it's got to be like like everyone's Jiminy Cricket combined is like this God force. But then that God force has no, I think it'd be weird, but it'd be interesting if that God force has no power outside of that. Like there's no afterlife that it controls. It didn't actually create the universe. It's just like this force that like whispers into people's minds what is moral. It's an interesting idea. But I mean, I think if that's the case, if that's what he believes, we don't know that because he doesn't really spell it out. I don't know, like, what is the point of him doing this conversation in the first place? Like, there's a clip that goes viral, and it's a clip they play right at the beginning where it's like this guy's like basically attacking Jordan Peterson for even being on the panel. And as much as I like Jordan Peterson, I'm kind of like, what is the point of this if he's not like, if it's supposed to be a bunch of atheists arguing with a Christian, like if he's not really Christian or he's not really a theist or believes in God in the standard sense, what is the point of the conversation?
Well, I think Jordan Peterson's the reason why a lot of people are turning back to religion. Obviously, the younger people are rediscovering Christianity, and a lot of people are converting to Christianity. So I think what do you want? Kent Hovind out there? Come on. Young people are not going to respond when the young earth creationist comes out and spouts a bunch of hooey, right? At least Jordan Peterson is making complex arguments that I think are more appealing to young people and just people in general than the Kent Hovinds of the world, right?
Obviously, listen, Kent Hovind is a retard. Okay, and all that young earth creationist stuff is stupid. And yes, Jordan Peterson and the way he talks about the Bible, very interesting. If he wants to have the position that he has a different form of interpreting God beyond what like the average person thinks of God, at least in the Christian sense, that's fine. I just think he should be upfront with it. And I think if he's going to argue in favor of Christianity, not necessarily from like I believe Jesus was an actual person who died for your sin sense, but more like I believe Christianity is a net positive for society. I think those are good. I think that's an interesting conversation to have. And I think he could then argue with atheists that position specifically, if that is his position.
I am in favor of him doing things like this because I do think people who are questioning, people who might be religious, who are kind of questioning, which obviously that's everyone in this modern age, right? Even religious people, I think their faith is constantly tested by the modern world. I think people can watch this from a religious perspective or a non-religious perspective and think something interesting is going on here. I might like to learn more about this, where just the religion, the kind of Christianity that I grew up with, and I grew up Baptist, it's all designed to give you all the simplest answers in the world. And it's not very fulfilling for people who are more educated, more complex. And I think everyone in the modern world is more educated, especially when we've got all kinds of information coming at us night and day, right? I do think people, they know a lot more and are a lot more socially aware. And I think this is a far more interesting evolution to the kind of Christianity, church-going fellowship than I grew up with. So I do think it's a turn in the right direction.
I agree 100%. I'm just saying I want the conversation to be transparent on what the conversation is. I want to understand what the conversation is.
Mm-hmm. I grew up going to Bible study and stuff, and the shit
So
we
did
talked
I.
about in Bible study
Boring as shit.
was boring as fuck.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yes.
If we were talking about Jordan Peterson, and you see this, I mean, there are a bunch of preachers and whatnot on YouTube that are trying to figure out, why is this so interesting to people? Maybe we can talk about, let's go back to the beginning there. I thought we were going to watch this whole thing. So
Yeah, we are. Oh, I just
Okay.
jumped at just cut off a little bit of it.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think, they're trying to figure out from a religious perspective, what is this? Why is this putting butts into seats, right? Jordan
Mhm.
Peterson's selling out big amphitheaters all over the world. Why? How can I manage that? We would do, when I was a kid and we did revivals in church, we would have guest speakers come, and sometimes the guest speakers were just phenomenal. They were so
Mhm.
entertaining by comparison to the guy who got up and talked in front of the church every single week. That guy would
Yeah.
put me to sleep. I can't even remember his name. He was absolutely everything he said just, I mean, I was bored as hell in church.
Yes.
As soon as I got old enough to protest, I told my parents, look, I'm not going to that church anymore.
Well, and it's obviously that's a massive failing of the religious establishment you went to, because the whole point, religion should, at least in theory, should make you feel motivated and inspired and feel something. If it's not making you feel anything, then there's a problem.
Yeah, I jumped ahead in the book and I read Revelations, and I was completely enamored by Revelations. I studied every detail of it. I wanted to be a little prophet, a little prophecy. I did book reports on Revelations.
This is when Adam was like, listen,
in
story needs
school.
conflict. There's a lot of conflict going on in
There's
Revelations.
a ton of conflict going on. Yes. I thought this was fantastic. I've always loved apocalypse movies because of that.
That's funny.
So that I didn't. There was enough interest in Revelations for me to be continually interested in religion, but not interested in. They never talked about Revelations in. I mean, I would force them to talk about it in Bible study, but they would never talk about it in the regular church. So I guess
Right.
that's pretty hard for working people.
It's kind of trippy.
See, regular people going to work at the bank or a factory or the mall, where, right? Every week they're talking about Revelations. Probably best not to, but
Well, this very interesting phenomenon, which is like when you're a little boy, especially, you really like dark, crazy shit.
of
You're just like,
course.
oh,
Oh,
bunch of
yes.
people dying. This is my jam.
Right.
I don't know why that is. when you're
Chicks
a little
having a
boy.
baby out in the sky.
Yeah, you're like,
"What?"
I want to know about, like when you're a little boy,
A
you're like, give me the
dragon
monsters
sitting
and,
there waiting to eat
yes,
the baby.
demons. Yeah.
A lot of conflict. Yeah.
Okay,
The
so
opposite of
let's-
Lilo and Stitch. No conflict.
Okay, so we're gonna watch some clips of this. Let's go back to the beginning part of this.
Right.
This question: how was Scott off track?
This guy
How you
was
doing?
super
Nice to
happy with
meet you.
himself
Nice to
too.
meet you.
This is like a big opportunity for this guy.
Yeah,
This guy's like, I bested Jordan Peterson. I did what Destiny couldn't do.
right. I didn't watch the whole video. I watched most of it,
Right.
and as I said, as I said, I like Jordan Peterson a lot. I don't think he had a good showing in the video, at least the parts that I saw.
Yeah, I cringed at all of this because it did seem dodgy. So we'll watch it. You guys can weigh in, tell us if you think it looks dodgy or if it's perfect. So all the faces in the background the people are completely snickering. So that completely emboldened this guy.
I guess since you said morality and purpose cannot be found in science, it would just depend on like what you're referencing. If you're saying a description of your psychological preferences would be considered within science, sure. But I don't think that you have to say that it comes from science in order to be like an atheist. As an agnostic atheist, I don't know if God exists and I don't believe that a God exists. And the only ones that I would really reject would be like the all-knowing, all-powerful, all-good, perfect notion of God that plenty of Christians like prescribe themselves. So I guess
How is that relevant to this claim?
you're basing a position of morality and purpose in some like notion of God that isn't the same type of notion of God that typical Christians would prescribe. Your notion of God is
what typical Christians?
Yeah, typically when I talk to Christians, they say that they believe in an all-knowing.
How about Cardinal Newman, who defined God as conscience? He's a major influence on all of Catholic social theory. How about that?
Okay, let's weigh in a little bit here, because obviously we both study moral philosophy, we both study moral psychology. So I have a very clear definition of morality, that morality is a set of rules that binds individuals into cooperative groups to compete in the world for resources and members against other groups. So I know it's a mouthful. I remember it. It's basically based on the work of Jonathan Haidt, and it just seems perfectly clear to me that if you conceptualize morality this way, you have all of these teams of people that are evolving, and they can structure how they do things very, very differently. So I do think there are probably different sets of people that evolved in the past that had really different moralities than we have, that probably didn't serve them well in the real world, and they ended up dying out, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and when those moralities die out, other people with other brain patterns that create other moralities, they survive, right? And it's basically a Darwinian process. So you get the morality that we're looking at today, but we still have this war going on kind of between the authoritarian type society and the democratic type society, right? So there's two big moralities still in play.
There's a guy earlier in this conversation who talks to Jordan Peterson, and he lays out a very similar foundation of morality as yours.
Right.
And he talks about how, like, evolution basically evolved. I'm sorry, morality evolved in creatures and in humans as a means of allowing group cooperation.
Yeah, he talks about the apes and the animals as well.
Right.
Yeah.
And Jordan Peterson agrees with that. Seems like he agrees with that conception of morality completely. But then they kind of get bogged down in this, like, because Jordan Peterson's claim that they're attacking or trying to refute is that there's no way to, I forget the exact way it was phrased. There's like no way to find morality with science or something. And he's like, well, what do you mean? We found it because we can find it's the evolutionary process. And then Jordan Peterson's like, well, he's kind of like implying that he means that you're not discovering morality in a lab with like science. It evolved or it emerged from evolution or something. So therefore it's not scientific, which, I mean, I understand what he's saying, but that's not really, if that's what he means by that, it's not really like a religious thing then, if it just emerges a natural property of group cooperation.
It changes with the environment, obviously, but if you can define the environment and the human beings cooperating in the team and the moral rule set, I mean, you're basically in a scientific frame.
No, but basically, like, the guy was trying to say that it evolved because it, like, this thing that we call morality or cooperation evolved in group animals because it has to, and the group animals can't exist without it. And he seems to be on the idea that there's this some sort of unconscious or group conscious morality whisper, Jiminy Cricket entity that is God or something, and that's what's directing the flow of morality.
Sure, yeah. I think a lot of religious people would like that, because it's 99% scientific. You can explain it in a rational way about the objective world, but they leave a little room left. Well, that evolutionary process. And if you go back to his talk with Sam Harris, this is one of the definitions of God that he lays out perfectly in one of the definitions. He's just saying, I think he says something to the effect of God is that which selects.
He did say that. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So this selection process that I'm talking about, it's really the environment that selects, right? Obviously. Look, you can imagine in situations that are do or die, those apocalyptic situations, right? Morality might just change a little bit, right? You've got one male and 20 females left, right? You're probably not going to have a monogamous situation going on there, because your goal is to like pump out as many babies as possible so your group can survive.
Well, there's a question that comes up in this, where someone brings up how slavery was allowed in the Bible. And the
Right.
question is, how could God be moral and allow slavery? And I don't know, to me, and I don't know if this is a unique view or not, I could 100% believe, I mean, I don't believe that the Bible was like literally written by God or anything, but I could theoretically believe that even if the Bible was literally written or inspired by God, that humanity at different points in time is not going to be able to accept what we would consider the highest form of morality at all points in time. If you go back to 5,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago, I don't know if you literally could get a society to be like a liberal capitalist democracy with like that moral framework, or I think humans culture has to like get to various points first before it like can move to the next rung of moral evolution.
Technologically, I mean, technology is obviously part of it.
Culturally, in terms of just how people think about things.
I think slavery evolved because so you had originally bands of tribes that were competing against one another. And if the tribes encountered one another, they would kill all the men and take all the women, right? That was how it worked. I mean, this still takes place with chimpanzees. The chimpanzees live in troops. When they encounter one another, they go to war until one of the groups is gone, and then they feel safe, right? No one's going to come kill us.
Right.
So in that situation, there was probably a lot of situations where they're low on members or low on resources, and there's strong men in the other tribe, right? But they can't those men can't be full members of the tribe, right? So slavery is kind of like this halfway point where you're like, okay, well, we'll take you on as a member, but you're a slave, right? You have to do whatever anybody in our tribe says, and if you get out of hand, we'll kill you. So I could see slavery kind of evolving in that situation, just because obviously a human being's a huge resource, right? You have someone who's 20 years old, that's a 20-year investment in this person. And that could be super helpful, especially in a situation of tribal life, right? It's a whole other worker.
Yeah. But my understanding again is I think slavery only came about once farming was introduced.
You don't think different tribes had slavery as well?
I could be mistaken. I'm not sure.
They just killed everyone.
If hunter-gatherer tribes would collect slaves because they might be more costly from a resource perspective than the benefit of having another hunter or something.
Even if it's still, I mean, obviously once agriculture came into place, the goal was to go out and find other people to become slaves. They're basically
right, because you could just
co-opting other people's resources. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. There's and unfortunately there's it made more resource perspective to do that.
So instead of wiping out the tribe, you were taking their labor resources.
Right, but then there was because the whole thing is like the prisoner's dilemma. Because then there's going to be some human tribe that says, okay, there's another human tribe here. It's actually more beneficial for us to have some like trade relations or some sort of cooperative relations without murdering each other based on trust. And as long as that trust holds, if you can trust them, right? And as long as that trust actually holds and both sides are actually, solving the prisoner's dilemma with trust, they would both become stronger because of it, usually.
Yeah. Well, this slavery, I mean, obviously it's morally abhorrent to us, and that's a good thing because it's completely inefficient in a modern economy and social situation.
Well, no, slavery is obviously morally horrible. I guess what I was saying with my point was that I think if you went back to humans 5,000-10,000 years ago, I don't think you could just implement and say, okay, this is like American style morality. Like, I don't think you could just shove that into society and it would work. I think society has to work itself up to that point through a long process.
Yeah, an evolutionary process working on the people and the societies and the cultures.
Right.
But like we agree, trade is better than annihilating one another, right? If we went back, all of the morality in all of the tribes would be, if you encounter another tribe, annihilate them completely. It's too dangerous to have them out there.
Of course.
Because they're going to try and annihilate us.
of course.
kill all of the men and take all of our women.
Right.
So
Well,
the pattern of trade is a moral. I mean, that's one of the moral rules.
Right. And so the reason I was bringing it up is just that I was saying, like, even if you hypothetically think God wrote the Bible or like literally wrote the Bible, I think you can make the argument and say, well, because you can't just, even like God can't just say like, here's the best moral system even before like society's ready for it. God's kind of have to like get humans to like work their way up to the moral system.
Okay. That's a good argument.
That Christian.
Sure. So do you believe in the all-knowing, all-powerful, all-good notion of God?
What do you mean by believe?
Do you think it to be true?
That's the circular definition. What do you mean when you say you believe?
How is that circular?
Because you added no content to the answer by substituting the word true and believe.
I said you think it to be true.
All right. So if you believe something, you stake your life on it.
What do you mean by that?
You live for it and you die for it. That's what I mean by that.
This is just so patently bullshit. Like immediately I was like, what? I'm so glad he calls it out. I mean, there's lots of things that we believe that I'm not going to stake my life on, right?
Right. Yeah, you believe that you're going to walk outside and put your key in your car and it's going to start.
Exactly.
But if someone said like, would you stake your life on? You're like, well, no, wait, hold on a second. I don't think so.
Exactly.
Not necessarily.
There's a chance it won't start, right?
Yes. Or I mean, same thing. You believe when you drive your car to the store. It doesn't, you do, I guess you do to some extent, gamble your life. You think your car's not going to randomly explode or something and like run you off the road or something.
Right.
But I think my problem I have with a lot of the way that Jordan Peterson conceptualizes all of this is that he kind of keeps going back to this idea of like the hierarchy of values and beliefs and choices, and that the way that you see what a human truly believes is sort of based on the choices they make, what they put at the top of their hierarchy. Like he said this a bunch of times, and he says this in terms of like belief of God. And I have two problems with this, which is number one, that's not really what anyone means when they say belief of God. So I don't know why he's complicating it. Like if he wants to talk about this other concept, that's fine. He can talk about this other concept, but I think you still need to sort of address or deal with what people mean classically when they say the words.
A conscious entity created the universe. I mean, that's what people mean. It's very simple. Yes.
A conscious entity with superpowers.
Do you think that's true or not true? It's very simple.
Right. But then you get into what does that mean? Well, what do you mean by do I think it's true? Do I act like, he says, well, do I act like it's true? All these other things. Is that I don't actually agree with his argument about the fact that people act in accordance to their highest beliefs. Because when you talk about what people believe, all right, I think what you mean, the way I interpret that is, what does someone on a conscious level think is the explanation to something? Okay. Say, do you believe in God? On a conscious level, they think yes or no, that they believe, there's some omnipotent being or something that exists out, in the universe that's controlling things. But most people throughout their daily life, when they're like interacting with the world, I think most decisions people make are not necessarily conscious decisions. They're just sort of reactive or ingrained behaviors. They're not necessarily like what you believe. Like, you could have someone who, and I think a very classic example, a clear example of this that Jordan Peterson should be very aware of, and maybe he's talked about this, would be like with drug addicts, is, you could have someone who's addicted to a drug or addicted to anything, and they could believe and 100% be consciously aware that it's bad for them to do the drug. They want to stop the drug. They want to get off the drug, blah, blah, blah,
They'll
blah,
tell
blah.
themselves they're not going to do it tomorrow.
Yeah,
they're
exactly.
Quitting today, every single day for the rest of their lives.
They'll say that and they'll truly believe in all this other stuff. And then the next day they'll do the drug again. And it has nothing to do with, and I would argue it's nothing to do with their belief. It's that there's just a chemical process in their brain that's highly addictive that just makes it so that they like feel compelled to do the action. It has literally nothing to do with belief whatsoever.
Right.
And so that's where I have a lot of problem with how he defines God in terms of this, like what someone does in the highest, in the hierarchy of values they interact with, is that I think usually when people's usually people are sort of on a kind of NPC level autopilot, I think, with most of our actions. I think that's everyone, myself, when we're like walking around, when you go to decide what to eat. I mean, are you really like, making a very conscious decision about this? You're just like, what do I feel like? And then you sort of just like reach in the fridge.
There is some connection between action and beliefs, though. I think what we believe does shape our actions tremendously.
Mm-hmm. Of course, obviously to some extent.
Look at a lot of people have the belief that we think is incorrect, that racism is terrible in the United States, and that we're living in the antebellum South in 2025, right?
To be clear, when you said that racism is terrible, you mean that that there's a lot of racism going on, not the concept that racism is terrible.
Right. They believe that racism is ubiquitous, would probably be a better word.
Yes, that'd be a better way of
It's everywhere.
saying it.
Yes. They think racism is terrible and everywhere. Yes.
Is omnipresent in America at the moment. Yes.
So that person is going to behave much differently, right? That's the person that's going to run from the police, right? They think the police are racist and the police are out to kill them. So I do think, obviously, what you think to be true, and I like his framing, just what you think is the truth, does shape your behavior considerably. Oh,
yeah. Don't get me wrong. Obviously, what you believe about world is going to shape your behavior. I'm just saying, to me, I think a lot of things people do that are both destructive and constructive are not really based on this like thought process, not like really based on a belief.
Right. Yeah.
Are based on this sort of biological unconscious processes of how your just brain operates.
Right.
And so that's why I have a problem with how he sort of structures God as like, well, do you act like you think God exists or not? It's like, to me, that doesn't really answer the question. I could 100% believe that there are people that you strap them to a polygraph test. If you could read their mind, if we're going to have mind reading AI machines in the future, they will 100% tell you up, down, all around that they believe in God and that they believe that people go to hell and all this other stuff. And then you're like, well, how do you do these bad things? And they'll just rationalize it away. They'll just justify it. Well, hold on. It's like, well, they still believe that stuff. Just because they seem to be contradictory doesn't mean they stop believing it or they don't believe it.
Humans are great at contradiction.
Yes.
That's what they do best.
And I don't know why Jordan Peterson kind of gets trapped or sucked into this sort of loop of like, you have to bet your life on something for it to be true.
Yeah, I think he regrets saying that. We'll go forward here. And
he said it before. I've heard him say this line in other conversations.
Yeah, it might be time to retire that line.
Yeah.
It isn't something that you say. It isn't something that's associated with logical consistency. It's not declarative. It's not propositional. It's not a figment of your imagination. It's the presupposition of your attention and your action. And you're either fragmented, in which case you worship multiple gods, or there's some unity at the bottom of it that makes you an unstoppable force.
Okay, so you're saying that you don't believe something if you wouldn't die for it?
Not really, no.
Okay. So then,
how would you define belief? Something you say?
Well, can I explain? Like, I could believe it is the case that this pen exists, but if someone like threatened my life, right, I would lie in order to be able to save my life, right? Like, I think you would do that too. You wouldn't lie to save your life?
Don't be so sure.
You wouldn't lie to save your life?
How much do you know about me? I didn't lie to save my career. I didn't lie to save my clinical practice.
Would you lie to like save your children?
Jordan Peterson, every day he goes home, he watches that one episode of Star Trek.
Oh, he loves it.
With the 4 lights. There are 4 lights.
There
is a blue pen here.
That's where Picard is actually broken. Yeah, Jordan Peterson doesn't want to be Picard.
No,
his argument here is ridiculous. I would never be in Picard's situation. Well, let's just imagine you were, right?
Right.
His answer is a little bit offensive. I'm sure there were plenty of Jewish people in Nazi Germany that got stuck there fucking through no fault of their own, right? They're completely innocent.
From not a moral failing.
Yeah. He makes it sound like if you're in the situation, it's a moral failing of yours. What the fuck? That basically says any innocent victim is not an innocent victim. And why would you make that claim?
Well, listen, maybe he believes that, and if that's his conception of reality, that'd be very interesting conception of reality. But
then he
obviously,
does believe in karma. He does
Yeah.
giantly believe in karma. He's saying that everyone who died in the Holocaust deserved it at that point.
Well, I don't know. Listen, I don't think that's what he's saying, but
Right.
like it could be interpreted that that's what he would be implying through this line of reasoning that he sort of lays out here.
Yeah.
But just in case no one, and I'm sure most people haven't seen it, most people aren't big nerds. There's this great episode of Star Trek Next Generation where Captain Picard is kidnapped by the Cardassians. It's not Kim, but he's kidnapped by the Cardassians, and they're like torturing him. And it's a very interesting like episode. It's like a two-parter, and most of the episode is about like this interaction of him being tortured. And the guy has 4 lights above him, and he keeps trying to get Picard to say that there's 5 lights because he's trying to like break him to say like, you will say essentially whatever I want you to say. And Picard throughout the whole thing keeps saying he refuses to lie to protect his life, kind of in the situation. He keeps saying there's only 4 lights, though you find at the very end, very interesting. Yeah, after he gets rescued, he admits to I forget who it is. He admits to someone that he actually saw 5 lights at the end. Like he had been through so much like torture that he like hallucinated the 5th light. Like his brain was like trying to protect him, I guess. And he saw the 5th light, but he still, but his ego, I guess, kept them grounded. He's like, no, fuck you. I'm not going to break those 4 lights.
Preference falsification is what they call it, where society all lies about their preferences to get along.
Mm-hmm.
And they call it preference falsification. I think when it flips, when everyone realizes, oh, I was just saying I believe this because you were saying you believed it. And this happens a lot in these communist states where everyone's forced into a position to lie about the situation because the government can come in and kill you and kill your whole family and stuff like that. So,
well, it's always tricky too, because in those situations, there's going to be some subset of the population that they'll regurgitate the lie, they'll repeat the lie, and they actually convince themselves that the lie is true.
Yes.
And there's some subset that they know it's bullshit and they're just doing it to like save their skin,
to get along.
It's kind of like the line test, or I forget it's like what the name of it is, but there's some famous psychological experiment where they'll have like a bunch of people in a classroom, and the teacher will say like, "What's the longest line of the bunch?" And everyone's in on the experiment except for one person, and all the people in class will say the wrong line is actually the longer line, and it's really to see if the one person will basically give in the peer pressure. And it's interesting because some people just give in the peer pressure because they'll assume, well, I must be wrong.
That they're wrong.
I can't, right? Some people just do it to get along. Some people might actually convince themselves because they're like, well, I mean, I don't want to be, the last one, so I must be wrong. So I'm going to convince myself that line is longer.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, that experiment has been done many times.
Yep.
Your mom, your dad.
I don't think lying would save them.
Can there ever be a circumstance logically that lying could save someone?
Yeah, and if you're steeped in sin, you're likely to live in circumstances like that.
I'll give you an example. If you're like in like Nazi Germany, and it is the case that there's like Jewish people in your attic and you're trying to protect them,
example.
Would you lie to like the Nazis?
I would have done everything I bloody well could, so I wouldn't be in that situation to begin with. It's a hypothetical, and it's not answerable.
Hypotheticals?
Yes, I would lie to the Nazis. Like, what's so fucking difficult about that? Hell yes, I would lie my ass off. I would give them an Oscar-worthy performance.
Mm-hmm.
No Jews in my attic. Why? Why is it so difficult to say that, Sitch? What's going on here?
Because he's trying to make this argument that I don't fully grasp the purpose of.
This little example destroys the entire argument. Look, if your argument is that fucking flimsy, you better find another argument.
Well, didn't this exact similar argument come up in the Sam Harris conversation about he gave some hypothetical? It was a slightly different, I think, context, because he gave some example of like whether the truth was always beneficial or not, and he said he had a hypothetical of a person who would like telling you to list all the presidents in order, and if you got them wrong, he would kill you. but the person who was telling you to do that had the wrong list in his own mind. So you had to actually have the wrong information to survive.
Right. Yes. I remember the example, yes. And you would give the wrong information, obviously, to survive. So
if you knew that, yeah.
Yeah, everybody watching this understands the complexity of the situation, and the lying is the lesser evil than letting the Jewish people get killed by the Nazi soldiers, right? So I just the correct answer is yes, lie to the Nazis.
Yes.
Why is it wrong to say that?
I don't know. I have to be careful because I feel like when I watch these interactions and him talking about God, I guess I start to feel like the way that a lot of people on the left always feel about Jordan Peterson. Because we always, we've interacted with and talked to a lot of people and heard a lot of people that they say, oh, Jordan Peterson is just always being dishonest or using word salad.
Oh, I don't think that. Yeah.
I don't think that either. But they've always said that. But then I finally get like a touch of what they're sensing when I see these interactions. So that makes me wonder, like, okay, well, maybe I'm just the one in the wrong. Maybe he is getting at something that I just don't understand, and most other people don't understand.
Well, he tries to retreat back to there are steps that get you to that point, and that it begins with small lies, little lies. So his argument is very clear. He's saying that you have to avoid those little lies that are going to get you to the point where you're standing in front of the Nazi guard with Jewish people in your attic.
Right.
I don't believe that world exists. I think sometimes life comes in, catastrophe comes in, and innocent people get burned.
Of course.
And the correct answer, if you're in that situation, is to do your best to help the people survive. It just seems cut and dry.
No, I can't answer a hypothetical like that because
Did
it's
you eat
far.
today?
Look.
Did he say, did you eat today? He did. He got him.
Oh,
on
did
the
he say it?
breakfast.
I missed it.
Would you lie?
Begin with? It's a hypothetical and it's
You
not
can't answer
answerable.
hypotheticals?
No, I can't answer a hypothetical like that because
Did
it's
you eat
far.
today?
He did. Oh no, he did. He hit him with a breakfast question. Oh no.
Did you eat today?
Oh.
What if you did? What if you didn't eat today?
I wonder
Here's
if
a
he
hypothetical for you. How would you be doing in this debate if you didn't eat today?
did he catch? Do you think Jordan Peterson like caught that, or is he? I don't know if you heard him because he was talking.
This guy, I imagine this guy's social medias are just lighting up today. This guy's like a legend now on the left. He's got to be.
Well, I'm sure the other guy who was just like attacking him and Jordan Peterson told him he wasn't going to talk to him anymore. Like that guy probably.
Oh yeah, he rage quit.
Yeah,
the rage quit.
He got Jordan Peterson the rage quit. That's how he could frame it.
Right.
Look,
Did you
don't
eat today?
play games.
I'm not playing a game. I'm just
Yes,
asking if
you
you ate
are.
it.
If you present me with an intractable moral
See the guy? I guess I got to pan out so you guys can see it. There's this guy back here that's laughing his ass off because he knows what the breakfast question is. This guy back here, like, I'll hit him with the breakfast question. Do it.
choice that's stripped of context and you back me into a corner, you're playing game. I just told you I would do everything that I could to make sure that I'm never in that situation. By the time you've got there,
everybody would. Oh my God, it's so infuriating. It's so infuriating.
You've made so many mistakes that there's nothing you can do that isn't a sin.
Being born in Nazi Germany and trying to protect.
See, that is so offensive to me. That's so offensive to me. He's in that you can infer that he's saying lying to the Nazis is a sin.
Yeah, I don't know
what the fuck.
Yeah, I don't know what he means by that.
There's nothing you can do that's not a sin. No, the thing that you can do that's not a sin is trying your darndest to save the Jewish people and maybe even dying yourself in the process, right?
Right. Well, I don't know. Maybe he'd make some argument. I mean, he doesn't really flush it out, but maybe he makes some argument that basically everyone should have, people should have seen the writing on the wall, and the moral people would have voiced band together to voice their opinion, and either would have A, stopped the Nazis, or B, would have all been dead by now anyway. And so that's what he's trying to allude to.
there's children involved, first of all, so who don't have a huge say in what's going on here. Also, all the people who did speak out immediately, the people he's talking about, the people who are not going to lie to get along or pretend that there's five lights. What do you think the Nazis did with those people?
That's what
They killed them immediately.
Right.
Yes.
But yeah, so the argument would be if everyone did that, there'd be too many people for the Nazis to kill. They'd win the fight. It's because there's too many people that stand by, what is it? Evil is when good men stand by and do nothing or whatever. Right. So maybe that could be the argument that he would, if he fleshed this out, he would say that all the, if you're still in the position where you now have to lie to hide Jews in your attic from Nazis, like you shouldn't even be in that position because you should have been on the front line and you should either have defeated the Nazis or be dead by now. Maybe that would be the implication.
Okay, so you're basically taking fence sitters out of the equation, right? So there's going to be no fence sitters. There's going to be people that join the Nazis, and there are going to be people that speak out against the Nazis.
All the people who speak out. He's saying fence sitters would be the immoral position to have.
Yes, yeah. So so no one's immoral. Everyone is moral. People join the fucking Nazis or they speak out against the Nazis. Well, you can still get. You can still get. Well, I'm just saying, if you take the fence sitters out of the equation,
just be careful.
Look, people did join the Nazis, right?
Of course.
In this scenario, everyone that speaks out is going to get killed by the Nazis until they're all gone, right?
Right.
So the only other option is to join them or sit on the fence, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what are they going to do? I mean, I understand what you're saying.
Listen, I don't even know if that's his argument. I'm just trying to speculate. I'm trying to craft an argument that would fit the answer that he gave. I don't know.
The only way that works is if the people who are against the Nazis have the numbers. Oh God, I don't want to believe in a world where the Nazis have the numbers, but I just think that might be the world we live in.
Mm-hmm. Well, maybe in 1930s Germany, right?
Right. Yeah. Anyway, where's the
to people that you care about? Like there could be a Jewish friend that you have and you want to protect them.
I think you should
have
just
them
give
in your
up
attic.
on that line of questioning.
Give up on just like trying to clarify your position? Because are you like uncomfortable with me asking this question? It's just a basic hypothetical. Like I could ask you.
It's just a basic hypothetical where you put Jews' lives at stake in Nazi Germany. That's just a basic hypothetical.
Obviously, you would lie in that scenario to save their life, but you're like not trying to answer this question for some reason.
I just told you why.
Are you anti-fascist? Like, so you're
Why
anti-fascist?
Why are you asking that?
I was just asking, just clarifying. But like, okay, again, you're not answering this hypothetical because you know it shows that you clearly would lie to save someone's life.
I'm answering it in
Obviously,
a manner
that's not what
you
truth
don't
is.
find acceptable.
Obviously, because I care about truth.
I wouldn't be in that scenario.
Obviously, right?
There's a huge cut there. Seems like they cut something out. Jordan Peterson must have had a contract where he wouldn't let him publish anything he didn't like.
Well, no, they cut out, I forget who it was. Someone was on one of these Jubilee panels and they recorded it themselves. And there's like a lot of footage that they just cut out for time and stuff.
Okay.
So it's probably that.
They might have cut it out for time.
They probably, maybe. I mean, first of all, when I saw that Jordan Peterson did
they should
one of
not
these things,
cut there. I'm on the edge of my seat here.
Right. When I saw Jordan Peterson even did one of these things, I was like, oh God, like he gives very long answers. And these whole things are centered around like, you need to give very short answers because all these people are trying to yell, their positions at you.
Right.
Right, logically, because that's already happened. Like that's in the past. You don't have a time travel device. We're bringing this logical hypothetical up to show you that in some circumstances that do happen within the real world, you would lie to save people's lives. So your definition of truth isn't actually how we're typically using it. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to muddy the waters when I ask you, like, do you believe this? Do you think this to be true? So you don't actually have to answer the questions. And plenty of Christians don't like that because they clearly see that you don't really want to be associated with Christianity.
I can imagine that I was in a situation where the best I could do as a consequence of my previous mistakes was to tell the least amount of lie I could manage. Okay, but that would likely indicate that I had made all sorts of catastrophic errors on my way there.
So I get the argument, but even if you're sitting around with your friends and you're bonding, right? You want to know that the guy you're sitting next to, if you're the one in the attic, is going to be fucking lying his ass off, don't you? I mean, this is just This is just, I would look at Jordan Peterson like, motherfucker, you wouldn't lie, huh? Oh, okay. Okay. See if I return your calls anymore.
Who was it? Who was it? Kant? Who was the guy? There was one of those philosophers that was like, you have
The
to.
moral imperative.
Yeah, like lying is always morally wrong. I forget. I think it was Kant. One of those guys was like, you can never lie. And
Right.
I mean, I don't know. Maybe that's Jordan Peterson's position. I've not heard him and talk about that. Maybe that's his position, but I don't agree with that. I mean, obviously, I think usually you should try not to lie. It's usually best not to lie, but there are obviously hypotheticals that you can construct, this being one of them, where you should not, where you should lie. You should lie to protect, your
Of
loved ones and your
course.
friends. Yes.
Yeah, they're easy to do. Everyone does them. People do them when they're
Yes.
kids. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And the guy that is not going to lie to you when your life is on, or not going to lie to someone when your life is on the line, that's the guy you kick out of the group.
Yes.
Yeah. You go over there with the honest people who are all dead.
So you would lie to save someone's life. So again, you do believe it to be true in that circumstance, even though you lied in that scenario. So
Not
clearly that's
without
not what
the
you see to be true.
context that I put it in.
You were not willing to die for it.
said-
You were not willing to let other people die for it. So that's not what you see to be true then, seemingly.
Well, it's weird too, because his argument, I don't even think it's a good counter argument to Jordan Peterson's position, which I don't even agree
It's
with.
not.
The whole the whole whether it makes sense to say that whether you believe something is whether you die for it. That doesn't really logically connect to whether you would lie to protect someone's life, because that would just mean that, well, what you believe to be true is that this person is going to be killed by the Nazis, so you are lying to protect them. Right? That doesn't contradict Jordan Peterson's actual point. So this is actually, what's interesting is Jordan Peterson made a position, which I don't think is a good position. And this guy made a bad counterpoint that I don't think is the actual counterpoints to the position, but then it still tripped up Jordan Peterson down this like weird pathway of whether it's ever morally right to lie.
Yeah.
Bizarre.
You're doing exactly what I said you were doing at the beginning of the conversation. You're generating an impossible, restricted, hypothetical with no precursors to back me into a
How is
corner.
it possible? Is there something contradictory about it? Nice to meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet you.
Great conversation.
Yeah, nice to meet you. Yeah, fuck you. Fuck you, buddy. Oh my God.
I just, yeah. I mean, I get it. I totally get it. Maybe that's it. He doesn't want to talk about the Nazi thing since everyone's always calling him a Nazi. I mean, that's probably the most good faith way to interpret what was going on there.
Then he could, but that's not what he was saying. He was just saying that like you could construct a very restrictive hypothetical. And it's like the point. If you're engaging with someone in an honest way on these conversations, and I don't know anything about the other guy, so I don't know whether he was doing that or not. But I think it was a fair question. Is the point of the hypotheticals? The point of a thought experiment is the same purpose of a physical experiment. The point of conducting a physical experiment out in the real world is you're like, what makes something happen? Okay. Why when I pour chemical, why when I pour, why when I put the little, the little baking soda tablets in the Coke, does it explode? Right. You're trying to figure out like what makes something happen. And so when you do an experiment, a physical experiment, you're like, I need to isolate every potential variable and then study each one independently to try to figure out what is causing the reaction, or then seeing maybe it's a combination of two variables or three or whatever causing the reaction. That's the point of it. And a good hypothetical or a good thought experiment is doing the same thing. You have all these different variables that you're trying to work out and trying to answer a moral question. So you're trying to say, well, let's try to isolate all the variables to figure out exactly what is going on in this moral claim that you're making.
With morality, though, it's social questions. And that's why the hypotheticals are so important, because we're always scanning for good cooperation partners. Who is in our moral circle and who isn't? I mean, you see this specifically in the politics space, right? Where people completely wall themselves off from people in a different moral universe, right? The liberals, progressives are on one side and the conservatives are on another. And some of these silos, they just have a completely different worldview.
Okay, this guy's kind of interesting because this guy, I think he comes at it, at least in the beginning, he has like a I think, a very
And then
good, disarming way to interact with Jordan Peterson, which Jordan Peterson seems to be receptive to. So,
but it seems like a fake out because he
You
does
think
go
so?
at Jordan Peterson harder than a lot of the other people do.
Right.
So it
Well-
seems like he comes out with this disarming statement and then,
Right.
gotcha, bitch.
Well, I don't know if it's from a
He pulls
bad.
the mask off.
I don't know if it's from a bad spot. I think there's something that happens on an emotional level, and I've definitely, fallen prey to this, which is that when you're like talking to someone and you feel like they're dicking you around or they're like kind of being disingenuous, even if they're not, you just get a sense, you feel like there's some level of disingenuousness or dishonesty with the way they're talking to you. You start to get like annoyed and angry and heated and emotional about it.
Yeah, this is a difference between honor culture and dignity culture. You feel disrespected.
But
in
I'm not sure
dignity
it's a
culture,
disrespect thing.
Really? You said someone's
Maybe it
fucking with
is.
you. How are they not disrespecting
I
you?
guess you're right. I don't know.
How
To me,
are they
it's more,
not?
maybe it is. I never conceived of it personally as like I'm being dishonored, like like a Klingon. Oh, you've dishonored me with your. I don't know. Maybe that's what it is. It just annoys me. And I think it annoys most people because they're like, you just feel like it's like a waste of your time. Like you're not dealing with something real, something that's like tangible. And I think it's part of the problem. And through this conversation, when Jordan Peterson's talking to all these people, they're trying to grab something. They're trying to grab a point to attack, and he keeps misting away. He keeps, misting away into a fog, so there's nothing for them to grasp to actually attack, and that gets everyone very frustrated. And because like, okay, well, what you need to like, what is the claim? Like, be very specific. What are you actually saying?
He didn't escape the last one though.
No,
He didn't. He ran
No.
into a corner and said, "I'm invisible," but everyone's like, "No, we see you. You're standing right there."
the first claim here, and I'll come back to this in a second, but this is the first claim of the video. This is what he does, and I think it kind of sets the mood for the rest of the panel.
My first claim, atheists reject God, but they don't understand what they're rejecting.
Because then there's a guy, I'm not going to play with this guy, talks to him for like a very huge chunk of time. And it's like, you kind of get into this, like, well, what does it mean to believe in God? What does it mean to reject God? And they're just trying to like figure out what the fuck he's saying. And, and people can't figure it out because he doesn't just clearly say what he means by that.
Yeah.
It's completely unclear.
This is obviously they're rejecting the God we laid out, the God that intervenes and created the universe. And Jordan Peterson has done a big switcheroo on the definition.
Yeah.
So that the claim would be better articulated as they don't know my definition of God that they wouldn't reject.
Which that's fine. I have no problem with that. Jordan Peterson is like, listen, I think this is a better conception of God than what like most people think of it. That's totally fine. But I do think you need to be clear so people understand what you're talking about.
Yeah, you can make the same accusations we often make of the people who are changing the definition of racism to smuggle in illiberal ideas.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
Dr. Peterson?
Good to see you, man.
Pleasure.
What's your name?
Brian. So the first thing I would like to say is I would like to engage in this discussion in a symbiotic manner. I would not like to engage where there is one clear winner and one clear loser. Emotions are activated and it ultimately comes about ego. So I'm just saying I'm really trying to understand your position, and I would just like you to really try to understand my position.
Deal.
Okay, sounds good.
See, I think that is a good way. I mean, it's a good way to frame it. It kind of gets lost, unfortunately. And maybe this is a good way. Maybe it's a good way for me to try to think about a lot of these conversations going forward, is to not think of it like I need to prove you wrong, but just be like, I need to fully understand your position and then fully articulate my position. And then we just move forward, right? You don't have to have someone be decided the victor.
Well, you a lot more want people to change their position. And I don't give a fuck if people change their position. Like, I don't think people will change their position.
Right.
Even in the stuff, even in the economic stuff, which completely annoys me. I shift to, okay, people are going to believe this. They're not going to stop believing it. They're going to believe it to the day they die. How can I make money off of this, right? How can I improve my life off of what I know?
Right.
And I guess I take that same attitude into philosophy, politics. Like, how can I use this to improve my situation? Because people, they don't get, people are not, a lot of people are just married to their ideas. They are.
Yeah, I guess. But I mean, the context of this is that, we talk on YouTube to, about these issues. And I would hope that you're not just screaming, we're not both screaming into the dark cave here.
Well, I mean, that's obviously there are people who haven't made up their minds who you can persuade, right?
Mm-hmm.
There are people who are not firm in their beliefs. But as soon as you encounter someone who's firm in their belief, I mean, I think you're the type of personality that's just going to go at it. You're going to bring stuff out, but I don't think
It's a
you
waste
can
of
change.
time.
It is a waste of time. It is. It
Yeah,
is.
maybe.
I mean,
Maybe.
I think I think it's interesting interacting with people. I don't feel the need to win them over to my position. I really do think, and where this guy comes from, just let's at least understand what each other's position is without trying to persuade one another, I think is a good way to come at the situation. I just think it's funny because it's so disarming here. And now, I mean, we're going to watch a little bit of this. He's like, now that you've set down your Glock, here, let me pull my Glock out.
No, I mean, I think from a personal level, just in terms of how people interact in the world and how they feel in the world, it's kind of like when like the people that are more optimistic, have a more optimistic mindset, are going to be happier, healthier people because they have a more optimistic mindset.
Yeah.
It's like
myself, case in point. Yeah.
Right, exactly. It definitely would be, I think, beneficial for me and for everyone, really, if when you're in these conversations and these discussions, just change. Yeah, I got to work on it to change your mental frame to be like, I'm not trying to convince someone. I'm not trying to debate someone. I'm just trying to be interested in understanding what their position is. And
Yeah.
then I'll hear it out. I'll say, okay, that's your position. And then I'll say, here's my position. And then I guess you could just leave it at that.
A lot of people on the channel, I think I'm far more conservative than I actually am, just because I'm not trying to proselytize to conservatives. I'm not trying to win them over to my position. So I do understand a lot of them, but I have a respect for their position that I don't like. A lot of people have complete disdain for anyone that disagrees with them, which is unhealthy. Mostly for you.
Of course.
That's the way.
Of course.
That's the way that you're going to die of a heart attack when you're 60. So it's just not a good path to go down.
That's true.
Yeah.
It's that if you're saying that morality and purpose cannot come from science, is the opposite of that true, that morality and purpose can only come from God?
That's a way of defining it, yes.
Okay.
That's right. That's good. So I would say that with regard to the first...
See, it's completely self-referential, though, because Jordan Peterson's definition is God is the thing that binds us together and makes us make all those good decisions. So it's completely self-referential.
So, but then you're right. And then it's like, okay, well, when he says God, does he mean, and I guess this would be the question, when you say God, do you mean just the collective ideas of human morality that have been generated throughout time? Or do you mean that there's some sort of conscious entity that exists with thought independent of humans that is like whispering into their soul answers to moral questions? Right?
Yeah. Most believers believe it is a consciousness, obviously, separate from themselves.
Yes, but I could believe Jordan Peterson thinks the first thing I said.
Right, yeah.
That it's just some sort of,
mechanism.
Collected unconscious Jungian archetype that has been generated through human history or something. Like, I'm not sure what he believes.
Well, also just the goal. My definition is tied to the goal of survival, which religious people fucking hate, because then they immediately jump to, well, if the Nazis won the war and that moral system, which we perceive of as abhorrent, actually was successful, then that means it's the right moral system and God would sign off on it. I mean, there are a bunch of genocides in the fucking Bible, right?
Right.
So,
Well, I mean, I think with I wouldn't even say that that necessarily would be like when you talk about morality, you're really talking about like the base point of morality of how it even came to exist.
right.
I think maybe we shouldn't get kind of tied to the idea that there could be methods and modes of society that are more, quote, efficient at accomplishing certain goals, like raising everyone's GDP or getting to Mars faster or whatever, but they still wouldn't necessarily be moral in the framework that we tend to think of as moral because it would infringe on too many people's, freedoms and rights and all these other things.
Yeah. Yep. Definitely. That's why these thought experiments are good.
Right.
Claims say atheists don't understand what they're rejecting. Because I would say, by definition, God is the unity upon which moral claims are based. That's a definition.
God is the unity upon which moral claims are based. Okay.
Right.
I just in my definition of morality, where it's a set of rules, right, that people opt into, and obviously I think society is going to be better if you're opting in. It's not being forced on you. There are certain aspects, obviously, that are forced on you in any society, laws and whatnot. But so that set of rules, I mean, obviously it can change and it changes over time. So how is God connected to that? God is the actual set of rules?
I'm not sure. I don't know what he means by that. He doesn't clearly articulate it, I don't think.
Obviously, if you're trying to devise a society, you want a perfect set of rules, right? God would be good because he is perfect. So he could come in and sign off the rules and go, look, you got it right. The concept of God is great.
Okay, if there is a God, what is the purpose of life?
Well,
See, he shouldn't have moved to that. He needed to keep exploring. What do you mean? Because I don't know what he meant by that. And I don't think he ever really comes back to it. There was another part of this I haven't time for. I don't remember exactly what happened here, but let me check real quick. This is the first time
Christian
put.
Oh.
You're a Christian.
It's like, they put it right in the beginning.
You're a Christian.
You're a Christian, are you? He's like, maybe.
Dude.
Am I? Like, I don't know. What are we doing here?
Aha! Hi, nice to meet you.
how are you doing?
Good, how
What's
are you?
your name?
I'm Greg. Nice to meet
Hi,
you.
Greg.
Okay, so I feel like you're getting at this idea of polysemy, where we have multiple related meanings for a word, right? Like, for example, a famous painting can be emotionally moving in that it changes my emotional state. And when I was on the highway coming here to the studio, I was physically moving. I was changing my position. If I said, I believe the Mona Lisa is very moving, and you said, you don't really understand what you're saying, it's nailed to the wall, I would say that you're the one who doesn't understand what I'm saying, not the other way around. And the way that relates to this is there are many concepts of God, and I'll admit, I find a lot of what you say about that interesting. I'm familiar with it. The idea of this kind of Jungian hierarchical thing, or as a metaphor, or a symbol, or the kind of, atheist, materialist, literalist idea of a agentic, omnipotent, omniscient being that intervenes in reality, right? So when I'm saying that I reject the concept of God, I'm aware of these other definitions of God, but I think that when we use words, we tend to only imply one meaning at a time. So the same way that
I think this guy's
You're a
completely
socialist, right?
Yeah. Well, I'm not. I mean, I think this is completely correct, and
No,
this is why
I agree.
I think so many people get frustrated with Peterson in these conversations. Is this is exactly what they mean? They mean it in the very class. Everyone understands what they mean when they say, "Do you believe in God?" If you want to forward a different idea about what that meaning is, that's completely fine. You can do that. You can make a whole argument about how everyone's got it wrong. But I think before you make that argument, you need to address the standard argument first.
Right.
And then you can build upon that and say, okay, let me address the standard argument. do I believe there's a guy in the sky that controls the weather? Yes or no? Right. And then you move on to, well, what does belief really mean? Blah, 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 blah. And then you can kind of build upon that. And people won't feel like you're being sneaky. They'll just feel like, oh, well, you just have a different idea about something. You're actually addressing the standard idea, my idea first, and now you've moved on. So I can actually listen to what you're saying.
Right. Or you just don't give a fuck and you're like, I'll just listen anyway.
Well,
it's the atheists that are
right.
always getting triggered by this. Obviously, I've listened to a lot of Jordan Peterson because I just thought it is interesting. But I liked the 2 podcasts he did with Sam Harris, adjudicating what truth is. I mean, it is super interesting because he talks so much about postmodernism, but his idea of truth, like the value system being above science. I mean, that's a lot of what the postmodernists were saying, right? What is actually true is based on power.
And I remember we talked about that because we covered both those
conversations,
and we said that's sort of the irony of
Jordan Peterson's completely ironic. Yeah.
Right. No, but the atheists get mad about this because the people that are religious don't get mad about it because they see Jordan Peterson as an ally who's convincing people or persuading people to be religious or to be Christian specifically. So why they're not going to care if they sense that there's some sort of gamesmanship happening in the conversation.
Right. Yeah. And
it's the same way.
I mean,
if you feel
I am an atheist, but I just don't care. So.
Right. But you're an atheist, but you believe that religion and Christianity
can
have
right.
a net positive effect for society.
He's hurting their activism, so that's why they're getting upset. Yeah.
Right. It's like if we're listening to some communist talking and we feel like he's, being a sophist, you have the Vosh water agua conversation. You feel the sophistry going on to sort of confuse people or to trick people into communism, then we would not like that. And we would be angry about that because we're like, this is leading people down this bad, what we believe is a bad pathway.
You and I both believe that objective truth exists outside of any kind of social power dynamic, right?
Yes.
There is an objective truth that can be known. That's I think that's one of the bases of liberalism. I think that you playing power games with the truth is wrong.
You could be right. Maybe it's not super explicit in like a lot of early liberal philosophy, but I think implicit in it, yes. To believe in liberalism, you do have to have some belief that there is objective truth that we can
know
figure out
and adjudicate through science. That is. You can't play power games with. I mean, the truth is the fucking truth. Yeah.
Right. Well, you can, but you shouldn't.
Oh, people do all the time.
Right.
Yeah.
You should not.
But look, if someone pulls a fast one and they convince a lot of people that something is true that's factually incorrect, it doesn't change the fact that there is an underlying truth there that most people are wrong about.
Well, I don't know.
Some people, look, when you're talking about the postmodernists, they believe that whatever anyone believes is the truth, right? They incorporate the power dynamic. They say that whatever the power says is literally is literally true, which I just fundamentally reject that notion.
Yeah, I don't know enough about I haven't read enough ancient literature. Like I've read about it, but that's kind of colored by our modern interpretation. I haven't read enough firsthand ancient literature to know if, back in the ye olden days, did they also have a very strong conception and the importance of understanding what is true? They just thought it was what God tells you is true, what the Bible tells you is true, what the king tells you is true. Was the inherent truth claim being made an important part of the process, or was it not as important as it is now?
I don't think it is. Yeah. If you're talking ancient times, I don't think it is, right?
I assumed it was.
They did think truth and power were tied to one another.
Right, but did they think that those that are in power, they tell you what they tell you is true? That's why they have power, sort of like a karmic view of reality and justice? Or was it, I'd be surprised if back in the day they had sort of the postmodern view of like, well, there really isn't this thing as truth, or we don't have access to it, and it's all just what the powerful people do. I mean, at least from my interpretation, it seemed like they honestly believed that there were truth claims that religion or those in power had access to and were telling them.
I'm not sure they had a real concept of objective shared truth. I mean, they thought spirits inhabited objects and stuff.
Yeah, but they thought that was their objective truth. They thought that was true. I assume they thought that was true. They thought it was objectively true that you had to throw the virgin into the volcano to quell it.
Right.
Or the Aztecs, didn't they literally thought they were ripping people's hearts out because didn't they think it like kept the sun burning or some fucking wacky shit? Like, I assume they thought that was true. Maybe they didn't. Maybe, I mean, I'm sure there's somewhere some priest along the process that maybe understood from a dictator's handbook perspective that this was really just some way to generate power or something.
Steven Pinker talked about this in the book Enlightenment Now, and he says that obviously back in ancient times, everyone just died. Like, death was everywhere, right? Most kids didn't make it to adulthood. You'd see dead bodies on the side of the road everywhere, right?
Right.
So you would infer that God really likes death. He fucking loves death. So you'd say, maybe we can appease God by giving him what he wants, but we can be the pickers, right? Instead of him picking,
that's interesting.
Of a disease.
That's
so it was a very logical process.
Yes.
Yeah. So
That's
they're
funny.
like, I pick this person, right? They think 100 people are going to die this month. Let me pick the people that are going to die.
That's clever. Okay.
Yeah. So,
but that would imply that they do have some belief in like there's an objective truth. The objective truth is God chooses who to kill, but maybe you can appease God by sacrificing people in your place.
Giving him his fill. Yeah.
Right. Like it's some sort of hungry beast that you just have to satiate.
I mean,
that would imply that they believe in some there's some objective truth that they could have access to.
Wouldn't it have been better to work on germ theory back then?
Well, but they're not going to know that, because this is the thing. I think that people did always believe, for the most part, in this concept of there is some shared objective truth, because that's sort of how my understanding is, like, the whole point of how they think consciousness even evolved in animals was a way to try to understand what was going on in the environment in order to survive.
Yeah.
And so that's
trial and error.
Right. And so that's what consciousness is and has evolved to become, is just us walking around this physical space trying to understand it in a way to survive and propagate. And if that's the case, then we should have built in the desire to know what is objectively true.
It all came about from hypotheticals, right? Being able to model future potential events.
I guess you're right. That is interesting.
Created consciousness.
That is
funny
interesting.
That Jordan Peterson wouldn't engage in one.
Yeah, because you have some like little, single, double cell, triple cell organism, and it's got to run a bunch of like hypotheticals of how to like capture the little algae that it's going to eat, right?
Yeah.
And it has to like run, your brain has to run that, or whatever it's, the thought process is, it has to run that to game that out.
Yeah.
And you're right, it's interesting. It's kind of a hypothetical process.
This is why we love story, because story is just all hypothetical.
Hypotheticals are the beginning point of consciousness.
Right. Oh God, if he would have had that as a comeback, if he would have said, aren't hypotheticals kind of the beginning point of consciousness, that we can model future events and play them out? How could Jordan Peterson object to that?
Yeah, because if you can't model out potential things at all, are you really conscious?
Why are we do all these war plans for this, plans for that?
Right. No, because if you think about it, if you couldn't have that ability, wouldn't you just be an NPC? You just be like 100% reactive.
Well,
I think drawn through life, like a leaf down a river.
I was going to say most animals don't have this ability, but they do seem to have this ability at some level. And then you look at the experiments they do with birds, and it's just like birds can think in 20 different steps ahead. Holy shit!
Yeah,
you seen the crow that makes the hook and then pours the water into the thing and uses the bobber,
puts the rocks in the water to raise the water level. Yeah,
it's insane.
Yeah.
So something's going on there. They've done some trial and error in the real world and figured out how things work.
Well, that's what play is. And Jordan Peterson talks about this a lot too. Play is your brain running all these hypothetical war hunt scenarios with your friends to try to like get good at it.
Yeah.
Practice scenarios.
I would say the Mona Lisa is moving emotionally, but I would not say it's moving physically. I would say I reject the concept of God in this very literal way. But
What literal way?
the way that God is this omniscient, omnipotent, agentic, supernatural being that sent his son down and has, caused miracles and all these things like that. The idea of God is
Do you
like,
think that there's an underlying unity of things?
could you explain that question?
Well, scientists, for example, believe that science unifies in a comprehensive theory. Do you, yes, no, or that there are multiple competing truths? Those are the options. Either things unify or there are multiple competing truths.
I know that, for example, like in physics, people are looking for like a theory of everything.
And why do you think they're doing that?
It's interesting, it's helpful.
But they also believe that there's an underlying unity to things.
In a sense, yeah, like the material world and time and space are probably governed by universal laws and principles.
Partly that, yes, yes, but that the same thing might extend to a broader domain that would include imagination and value.
Could you help me connect?
I don't know if it's good. I mean, look, I like John Lennon's Imagine. I want to imagine a world where I don't know. They talk about monocultures in agriculture, right? Where they come up with a perfect species. But you're in danger there because if something goes wrong with that one species, you don't really have a backup or an alternative. It just, when there is a bunch of different groups, with the United States, they call the state governments the laboratories for government, right? That's a good fucking system because if you can make something work at the state level, it's probably good to do it at the national level. Morality kind of functions the same way, even with all these different competing churches, competing religions. This idea that there's just one morality, I see it as kind of a monoculture.
I'm assuming what he's trying to get at is sort of he's using the Jungian collective unconscious idea that there's this kind of intangible substrate that like everyone's tapping into that exists somewhere in the ether, and that this is sort of the unifying field, so to speak, of morality that is God. God is some sort of moral field that permeates life or something.
Well, look, there are 5 or 6 rules that are in every moral system that are helpful, right? Obviously, don't kill, don't steal, or don't murder, rather. Obviously, killing's different than murdering someone. Right. Yeah. So, but then a lot of the moral set around the edges can be vastly different from nation to nation, from religion to religion. So, but in his hypothetical that he's laying out, and maybe I'm incorrect about this, but doesn't it seem like he's talking about when you're talking about a theory of everything in science, you're talking about one way to explain the natural world, right? Doesn't that kind of map onto one way to structure society?
Yes.
I don't know that that's the case with a moral system, because you're talking about something completely different, right? In the natural world, you have all of these different species competing against one another, right? Is there a perfect species? Well, that's not really even relevant to how the system works, right? The environment changes, the species change, the environment changes. It's like a dance. Morality is the same exact way.
Right. So you're saying there's no one perfect thing because the environment is constantly shifting. And
that's the whole reason morality exists. Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
I do, from a pragmatic perspective, I understand why people must believe that there's one perfect moral set, because you as an individual can't really opt into other different moral sets, right? You can to some extent, but with great effort. Like if you wanted to go live in Russia and join a completely different religion in Russia. Well, I don't know how many religions they even have in Russia or accept in Russia, right? You might have to opt into one religion if you're moving to Russia, but you understand the concept. If you want to move from one moral system to another, I mean, you're so invested in that moral system because you're in a boat with you're in a social system with a bunch of other people. You're basically in the same boat. You have to believe that that's the best system.
Well, I guess I would say, you know, you're saying like, when it comes to evolution, it's kind of the goal is to survive and populate. And the method is, you have these random mutations that are being selected for via sexual selection and predation, essentially.
Yes.
And so like you're going to constantly have this shifting process that occurs because the environment is going to keep changing, right?
Right.
When you ask the moral question, could there be a perfect morality? I guess I would say, well, we don't actually know because we don't know what the selection, we don't know what we're selecting for, so to speak. Like if there is a heaven and the rules to get into heaven, there's a heaven and a hell, and the rules that govern us getting to that are following Christian dogma. Or it's a specific subset of Christian dogma, Catholicism or Protestantism or something, right? Then you would say very clearly, that's the perfect moral system. Everything else is wrong because you're going to go to hell, right?
Yeah.
But we don't know the answer to that question. We don't know if there is an afterlife. We don't know if there is a God. So from that perspective, then we don't know what the perfect moral system is. But if
Right.
there is an afterlife, if there is a purpose, then there has to be some perfect moral system theoretically out there somewhere, right?
Mhm. I'm only talking in terms of the natural world, not necessarily.
Sure,
I mean,
sure.
this other
You're talking about from like get from people
life
to
as a test to achieve immortality.
You're
That's
talking about
completely
from the
different.
perspective of having people cooperate in groups.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well,
I mean, I don't. Yeah.
the immortality thing evolved, in my opinion, as a carrot to convince people to act in a certain way. It's an incentive mechanism. Heaven and hell are both incentive mechanisms to make people follow the rules. But what really happens is people follow the rules and that society thrives or dies.
Right.
Yeah.
Brian, thank you for the $50. Says Jordan Peterson's conception of God is not just a personal definition. God as a being with a form is a new and misguided idea of what God is. God has been understood as formless, and the new ideas only had people imagine God in our image, which was a mistake.
Okay.
It's interesting because, like, personally, I believe God is like formless. But my understanding was if you go back to like, and I could be wrong about this, I'm not some biblical historian. It's funny, I just had a conversation with Sam about this yesterday. My understanding was if you go back and like when the Jews or the proto-Jews, whatever they were, wrote the Bible stories or had the Bible stories way back in the day in the garden, even all this stuff, they literally thought God was like a person. And that is why, God is described as like walking through the garden and them hiding from God, which doesn't really make sense in a kind of a more like ethereal position of God. How do you hide from the voice in the sky? And when they talk about like man was made in the image of God, like the Jews back in the day interpreted that very literally as like God looked like a person. And that's why there's not like all this like Jewish art of like religion. They're all done by Christians because the Jews thought it was blasphemous to draw an image of a man because the image of man or woman was too close to the image of God. So my understanding was that at least the Jews back in those days, they thought God was like a dude. And then obviously if you look at like, Greek mythology and things like that, they also seem to think that the gods were like entities. So unless you're talking about even further back, maybe even further back beyond that, there was more of like a spiritual, etherical view of things.
A lot of people do buy into the formless God, though. So,
well, I think nowadays they do.
right.
My understanding was that the formless God was more of a new concept of God, not an old concept. But I could be wrong.
I'm not sure.
That to the prompt.
Well, I'm trying to define God, the God
Yeah.
that I don't think atheists do a very good job of defining. Here's another question for you. What do you think guides you in your determination of whether or not what you're saying to me is true?
Can we go back? Can we stay on what we were talking about?
We are.
Okay.
You're just uncomfortable with the question.
No, I feel like you're just kind of throwing different spaghetti at the wall.
I'm not.
Okay.
I asked
All right.
you a very specific question. What is it that
See, he picked up on that. You're uncomfortable. So I don't like that.
But
Why'd you say something like that?
I don't think the guy isn't comfortable. I think they just don't understand the connections that he's trying to allude to or draw to or get at.
Yeah. He slided him and he slided him back with a spaghetti comment. So breaks down
Yes.
from here. These things are so fragile.
You think guides you when you're talking to me to help you determine whether what you say is true?
Logic, memory, reasoning, sensory information.
How do you distinguish that from being governed by something that's false?
An interesting question.
How do you know the difference when you speak between what's true and what's false? So you could imagine
Infer, right? I can infer.
From what principles?
So, and what are you getting at?
I'm getting at the fact that your conscience guides you. Is that reasonable?
Conscious is defined by my empathy and my reason, or my foundational.
Define it any way you want.
Okay, so that's how I'm.
See, but this is why when he says that God is consciousness or conscious, I don't know if he means like just conscious experience is God, or if he means like Jiminy Cricket conscious is God.
Your conscience. Yeah.
Because this is more like just your conscious experience of reality is what he meant when he says it's conscious in this context.
Oh yeah. It could be either way. Well, it just moral questions are about social interactions. It's about how this particular behavior is going to impact other human beings or other animals, right? Other living entities. You don't think about that stuff when other people are not involved. There's all kinds of behaviors that you participate in that don't affect other people. Those aren't moral actions.
Defining my conscience is my my conscience is my sense of
right
and wrong. Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Yeah,
Where does that come from?
I would say that comes from an evolved capacity to empathize and a recognition of the benefits of engaging with and nurturing that capacity. And then that empathy is constrained and guided by reason, right? Like, for example, I am driving down the highway. There's a kitten in the road. I'm going to empathetically feel, oh my God, I want to save the kitten. But then reasonably, like, I'm going to get hit by a car, right? So that's sort of the process through which I make ethical decisions.
Okay,
is
how do
empathy
you
constrained by reason?
Do you think that people can differ in their response to something empathically?
Yeah.
Is there a mediating principle that can tell you one person who's empathic and another person who's empathic that disagree, who's correct?
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think that's where we'd have to, talk it out.
Hold on, let me see.
In my system, yes, you can determine who's correct, but
Right. Okay, I think this is
Converse with each other, think about things, explain our perspectives, and then kind of reach a conclusion, right? That I think that we do that all the time.
So Elijah, the prophet Elijah, defined God in the Old Testament as the voice of conscience within.
Okay.
That's a definition.
So you're saying by that definition of God, I see. This is kind of goes back to where I'm saying initially.
I'm not defining it. Elijah defined
Okay, so
it.
as Elijah defines
It's
God.
defined that way in Jonah too.
Okay, so as
Cardinal Newman also
got
defined it that way.
as I'm sure you know many people who've defined it that way, and it's impressive. You're a very knowledgeable person.
I'm not trying to be impressive. I'm just pointing out to you how God is defined in the Old Testament.
All right. So to respond to that, I do think there are lots of interesting ways to define God. And that goes back to my kind of opening
Then how do we
statement.
specify what we're arguing about?
We use context clues, or we
Well, see, but that's like
you just said
you tell me. You're the one making the claim.
Exactly.
You need to tell me what you're talking about because I don't know what you're talking about. God also in the Bible is smoting people with plagues and shit. Like, which God, what form of God are we talking about here?
Yeah. There's
I
the
don't know
God
the
that kills all the hobos for me.
There you go. There you go. Yes. Like the God that, causes the flood, I wouldn't describe as like the whisper of morality, in the back of your mind. Like it seems like a different concept.
again, it goes back to my example of the Mona
I'm
Lisa.
defining God as conscience.
Okay, so that's interesting, but then you're kind of expanding the meaning of God.
No, I'm not. That's how it's defined in the Old
And
Testament.
this is a problem because is this like the first time we've really heard this concept that Jordan Peterson defines God as conscious, as consciousness, as you're conscious, as your Jiminy Cricket conscious? I assume he means by that.
He uses 10 definitions in that debate with Sam Harris. So
Yeah, but this
I mean,
is
he
like
could use
the
any
most
one of
recent
those.
thing. So maybe he's honed it.
This
Because I always feel like,
is no, this is one of the definitions in there, obviously.
right,
Yeah.
but I'm saying like I always feel like whenever he has these conversations, he's trying to figure out the answer himself because he doesn't fully understand it or he doesn't fully articulate it to himself. And so these conversations are an exercise in trying to understand himself.
Interesting ways to define God. And that goes back to my
Then
kind of
we
opening
then how do we
statement.
specify what we're arguing about?
We use context clues, or again, it goes back to my example of the
I'm
Mona Lisa.
defining God as conscience.
Okay, so that's interesting, but then you're kind of expanding the meaning of God.
No, I'm not. That's how it's defined in the Old Testament.
Okay,
in
so
Elijah and in Jonah.
Sure. So whoever. So
It's not whoever.
Okay.
Elijah is one of the
Okay.
major
All right.
Old Testament
All right.
prophets.
He missed his opportunity because he could have just said, okay, so obviously that's your definition. You believe in that God. Let's talk about the God who created the universe and intervenes in people's lives. Do you believe in that God?
Yeah, I don't think he's going to answer. Would he answer that question? He never
What do
answers
you
that
mean?
question. He doesn't
What
want
do
to
you
answer that
mean by
question.
believe?
Right, like he doesn't want to answer that question for whatever reason.
Do
I mean,
you
it's probably, yeah, but
Do you think that it is objectively true? What do you mean by true?
yeah, I know. That's why that's why people get so frustrated with this, when he talks about this, because it's like, what do you mean?
That's
What do
his-
you
that's
mean? What
his
do I mean?
trick.
You know what I mean. Okay, what are we doing here?
Right.
Why are we doing
We can have
this?
multiple definitions of true. I get it, right?
Yeah,
True in a moral context is different than true in a scientific context.
right.
I know the Azaz debate. Come
But
on.
that's why.
Come
But that's
on
why
now.
That's why people get frustrated, because it's like you don't want to be in a conversation where you're talking to someone and you know they know exactly what you mean, but they don't want to answer it. So you're like, okay, how do I like word this sentence in the most like? It's like there's an episode of X-Files. I didn't watch a lot of X-Files back in the day. My parents were huge fans of it, so I'd see some occasionally when I was a kid.
Oh yeah.
When I'd be in the room. And there's one episode that I did see which I thought was great, which was they find the genie. Okay, Mulder and Scully find this fucking genie. I think it was like in a carpet or something. And like every time Mulder makes a wish, like it's like the monkey's paw. There's some like crazy unintended consequence that the genie intentionally like fucks with them to do. So he asks for like peace on Earth, and then like the genie makes all other life disappear, right?
Kills
so, like,
everyone. Yeah.
No, they're just gone, right? They've been Thanos snapped away. So it's just peace, right? Because it's like quiet. So at the end of the episode, he's like sitting on like a typewriter computer, and he's like trying to like concoct the most lawyerly scripted like way to wish for something that has no loopholes. And it's like, okay, that's not how a debate should be. Like the person knows what the fuck I'm trying to say. Like, why do I have to try to sit here and type this fucking script out like you're an evil djinn that I have to like try to circumvent your malicious intentions there?
Yeah, it's interesting that he accused the other kid of playing games, right? When he's really
Right.
the one playing games here.
Right.
I understand the game that he's playing. He's playing the
Yes.
social game.
Yes.
He knows that if he came out and answered the question, it would be front page news. Jordan Peterson finally admits God doesn't exist.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Sam Harris wins. Never
All right.
gonna
He's
happen.
equal in stature to Moses.
Okay.
Right. So it's not arbitrary.
All right. So that is interesting, but it's not relevant to the context with which I am using the term God.
It's directly relevant. Atheists reject God, but they don't
Right, but
understand what they're rejecting.
you're
You
being-
accept conscience as a guide, and conscience is one of the defining characteristics of God in the Old Testament.
I think you're being intellectually disingenuous.
In what way?
Because again,
I asked you if you believe that conscience guided you.
You just asked me a question and then you stopped me from answering it. In this setting, you understand the way I am using the term God and belief.
Not
and
in
then
the
you're-
least. I don't understand how you're using it in the least. That's why I'm trying to define it. My definition of God as conscience is a lot more precise and oriented than your definition of the God that you hypothetically disbelieve in.
It's irrelevant.
So, because like again, if Jordan Peterson wants to make this argument that everyone in the world is stupid and wrong when they talk about God, that's fine. You got to address you got to address that first. Okay. You got to address the normative definition of the word before you start iterating it.
True.
Into the fault lines of this debate.
How is it irrelevant?
Because in common parlance, when we're talking about atheists, God, belief, not belief,
I
we're
don't
not
care
talking
about common parlance. I'm trying to get to something fundamental.
I think your point is irrelevant to the way that people tend to use these words. Your point that there are these polysemous
I didn't make
ideas
that
of
point.
God.
You did.
I
made a specific point that God was associated with conscience.
I just feel like you kind of retreat into this semantic fog.
I'm not retreating at all. I'm advancing, sir. You are retreating.
That's a great debate tactic.
Mm-hmm.
You just assign the position to someone else.
Right.
I'm not losing. I'm winning. You're losing, loser. Get the fuck out of here. Loser.
That's pretty funny. Mm-hmm.
So he's saying that in the Bible, God is defined as conscience. The little voice in your head, the Jiminy Cricket.
Right.
Let's leave out of it that in the Bible, God is defined in voluminous ways, right?
Mm-hmm.
Lots of different ways God is defined in the Bible. So
Right.
some of which atheists will reject and some of which atheists have no problem with. If you want to say God is, well, they probably would object to the framing of it as God, but they're not going to object to the idea that we have a little voice in our head that tells us right and wrong.
Mm-hmm.
So you want to move to something else, or you want to move on to super chats?
I guess we can move on to super chats. There's one other. I don't know if it's worth going to. There's just a guy.
We
It
can
takes a long
play it, I
time
don't care.
to build up. The guy talks about. He basically lays out your framework of morality
Okay,
through evolution.
let's listen to it.
But it would be. It's just unfortunate because it's like it doesn't go anywhere productive.
I wonder if you this is look. It would be huge for us to get Jordan Peterson on the show. Obviously, that would be a huge get for us. It would blow up our show quite a bit, right? I'm not sure. It would be difficult for me. I would much rather talk to him privately where we could have a real conversation about this shit, right?
100%.
Like I would forego the giant status increase just to be able to get to some meeting of the minds on this stuff.
Well, that's why, because I like Jordan Peterson. I think he's a very smart guy. I think he has very interesting, intelligent ideas about things. So I would like to understand this idea that he's talking about. And maybe you're right. Maybe it's just something that you can't get to publicly because there's too many issues with status or how other people would perceive it or something that we're just not fully aware of.
I don't think you could get to the truth of the situation though.
Mm-hmm.
The kinds of I'm hypothetically fielding a bunch of Jordan Peterson questions in a private conversation in my head, and I just think he's not going to answer any of these questions honestly anyway. So
well, yeah, because I mean, he doesn't know who we are, right? It's not like there's not going to be like some trust, you know.
You think we're going to record it? We're going to sabotage him?
Right, we have some purpose to do it to be like, aha, Jordan Peterson's a secret atheist. We gotcha, you know, something like that.
If he wanted us to sign a
that was the case.
NDA, well, if he wanted to sign an NDA that was just ironclad, where he gets all of my worldly possessions if I reveal any secrets about the conversation, I'd sign it.
Right.
That would be great. Oh my God! Imagine doing that. And then you ask him, hey, what's up with this game you always play? Why aren't you just clear? Why, what's going on there? Are you worried about losing followers? What's the dealio?
Mm-hmm.
Imagine if he came out and he was just fucking evil. He was like, yeah, I fuck with people.
No, I don't.
I just enjoy fucking with these people.
Mm-hmm.
But look, you've got a non-disclosure agreement. He's going to take all your stuff.
Right.
I mean, he'd basically be fucking with you at that point, right? Because you'd be like, oh my God, the world has to know this. Jordan Peterson is evil. But I can't say anything.
That was just a test, bucko, to see if you would. Follow the NDA. Here's my true beliefs. Yeah, exactly.
What if he comes out and it's like Bruce Almighty and he's like, I am God. That's why I can't answer any of these questions. Gives too much away.
That'd be pretty based. Like, oh wow, okay, listen.
Yeah.
Like
There's all kinds of different directions this could go. So
okay. Here's the last part. It's like a couple minutes.
Claim number 2, morality and purpose cannot be found within science.
Yeah.
Morality and purpose cannot be found within science.
What is up, Mr. Canada?
How you doing, man?
I'm doing great.
What's
How are
your
you?
name?
Brian. I think it's interesting that you say that morality and purpose can't be found in science. Actually,
No, within science.
sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Purpose, I actually grant you, because purpose is subjective, right? Unless you want to boil it down to the purpose of life is just to procreate, right? Sure, whatever. Morality is actually something that we do see. We actually have examples of Neanderthals and older individuals found in a tribe, missing an arm, missing teeth, still alive somehow in his 40s, 50s, right? Typically, you're a Neanderthal, you can't eat, you can't hunt, you die, right? But we know that members of his tribe were taking care of him, right? So we know that at some level, early in our evolutionary history, we actually developed altruism. We have examples of chimpanzees who actually have a basic understanding of fairness, right? If you give a chimpanzee 2 grapes, right, and his buddy gets 3, right? He actually freaks out, right? But you give both chimps 3 grapes and they're good. We have examples of parrots.
Except for the greedy chimps.
Except for the greedy chimps.
They want 4 grapes.
They want 4 grapes. You know, those do exist.
See, this would be the interesting question to ask Jordan Peterson to say, well, when the chimp that's not greedy is happy that it has 3 grapes like its friend, or it's unhappy because it only got 2 grapes, like is the voice of God like whispering into the chimp, like showing it, explaining to the chimp, or just sending that sensation and feeling of unfairness to the chimpanzee? Is that a divine action?
If you just conceptualize it from a materialist perspective, and it's just obviously moral intuitions are doled out randomly in chimpanzees, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that process God? Is he conceptualizing that process as God?
What do you mean? It's not random. What do you mean by doled out randomly?
Well, it's through genetic mutation. It is.
I understand. You mean the evolutionary okay, gotcha. I thought you meant the yes, right. Gotcha.
The evolutionary process, the fetal development, all that stuff introduces random mutation and random development. So you might have a chimpanzee that's not greedy, right? Even though most chimpanzees are greedy, and if that turns out to be a biological advantage, obviously a reproductive advantage, that chimp's going to spread that gene. If we think of it just in an evolutionary context, is he saying that process is what God is?
You could. I mean, that's the benefit, the great benefit of conceptualizing God as omnipotent and all-knowing and all-powerful is that you'd say, well, God could construct the domino situation that's going to lead to the evolutionary process that's going to create the moral system down the road, because God knows everything, right?
Yeah.
So God could just be the, pushing that first domino to get things started, but still foresee all the events that are going to lead you there.
Yeah. Powerful.
Right? But we have similar examples where we do animal tests, right? And
so morality is intrinsic.
I think
so. It precedes science.
I think that actually a better way to define it would be that social animals, which we are, right, require some level of morality.
What do you mean by science? Right?
Well, this is where it gets confused, because I think the guy is saying you can discover morality with science. And I think Jordan Peterson's saying, well, it's not, when he says found within science, what does that mean?
Totally.
What exactly does that mean?
Well, he seems to be making the argument that science didn't exist at a point in time, but trial and error, I think, has always exist in human beings. And trial and error is the foundation of science. Trial and error is experimentation.
Sure. I mean, you could literally say that's what evolution is. It's trial and error. And
exactly. Yes.
Scale, right?
Science has always existed.
Right. If you define it that way.
Yeah. Well, who knows how he's defining it?
Right.
Or
Into what? I'm not disagreeing.
Sure.
Why do they require that?
Because it's the only way that social groups can actually survive, right?
That's my point with
Sure.
regards to science. Thank you very much.
Is that
Precisely the point that you just made, that science has to exist within a moral framework that isn't in itself scientific.
how's that not scientific?
Well, because it's not derived from the scientific process, as you just
It
indicated
doesn't need
by
to derive
pointing
from the
to
scientific process.
Well,
It's
hang
the
on,
fact.
It is look, if it's an evolutionary process, it is devised through trial and error, and that is the scientific process. So
How do we define?
Checkmate.
Maybe that's define science. No one
Oh,
defines
yeah.
what science is in this conversation.
ask him to define it.
Yes.
I guess when most people think of science, they think of mapping the objective world. But
I think of a guy in a lab coat giving chimpanzees pills to get erections and grow hair. Okay, that's what I think of as science.
Nice. Well, that is in a moral framework, obviously. If you think
Yes.
chimpanzees should have boner pills, then
It's
obviously.
to give they're just testing the boner pills in the chips.
Oh,
Adam,
okay.
okay.
It's the humans.
trying to
that
give
need
the humans the
pills.
boners,
Gotcha.
obviously.
Okay, I gotcha. That changes the context considerably.
Yeah, obviously. Come on.
That
Hang on a sec.
we are social animals, and we need that to exist as a group.
I
right?
agree, but
Sure.
you pointed to the morality of Neanderthals, to the morality of chimpanzees. They didn't derive that from science.
They don't need to. That's not how
That's
that
my
works.
point.
Science
They did derive it from science. It was derived through trial and error. It's exactly how it was derived.
Right, but he's not defining science as like obviously he wouldn't define the natural selection as a scientific process.
I don't see how you could say, right? You've got one troop of chimpanzees with a behavior set and another group of chimpanzees with a behavior set, and one of those behavior sets wins out. How is that not fucking trial and error?
Well, what you could say is, okay, so if I ask the Google box,
Is he saying like it's magic? Like some magic force comes in and makes the chimps cooperate correctly?
no. They're talking past each other. This is a Sitch's law on the science definition.
Mhm.
So the argument I think you would make is what the guy is saying. He's saying, well, you use science to find it, so it's found within science. And Jordan Peterson's saying, well, this what is morality pre-existed before humans constructed the concept that they refer to as science. So therefore, morality predated science, right?
Mhm.
And so if the way that I guess I would try to bridge this is if you Google the definition of science, it says the systematic study of the natural and social world through observation and experimentation, aiming to understand and explain it. And I would say, well, obviously under that definition, you can use science to understand and explain what morality is and how it came about through some kind of process of natural selection and allowing groups to cooperate. Right? You could definitely come up with a theory for that seems pretty strong.
You can even explain why one morality is better than another morality.
Right. But then if you say, well, it's not found within science, you're just explaining it with science. I guess the counter would be like, well, isn't that true of everything? That's the point of science, is to find and explain things, not necessarily to create something outside of it, within itself.
Right. Most people don't accept that there is multiple competing moral sets, moralities. Most people think morality is objective and there's only one morality. And anyone who doesn't opt into it is living a life of sin.
Maybe. Yeah. That's probably true.
science explains it. So
Science doesn't explain morality.
it doesn't explain how social animals would need to be.
Well, that's
altruistic.
a complicated question.
But we see it though.
Yeah, but explaining the evolution of morality and explaining morality itself aren't the same thing.
Okay, so you're asking why does this happen?
Yes, that's more accurate.
Because we're social animals and we need to be.
Yeah, but there's more to it than that.
Is there?
Sure. For example, so we're moral animals that have a sense of the future.
Sure.
Okay, that makes us unique. And that structures our morality.
No, actually, there are other animals that can predict the future. Or not predict
really.
the future. No, tigers. Actually, there was a tiger at the SF Zoo that killed somebody. And so
Hunting
actually,
animals.
No. Kids threw shit at the tiger.
Okay, they're gonna flag on this too, which is unfortunate because I do think this. I mean, you get kind of stuck in the weeds of these examples, but this is the direction I think the conversation actually needs to go in. So.
Yeah,
Alas.
I hate it when they sidetrack for an example that's just to make some tiny fucking point. Like animals can see in the future. Yeah, okay. Animals can see in the future, but let's not get bogged down on that.
Right. But that's
he
always
is
what
wrong
happens.
about that.
Right. But that's always what
And
happens in
humans
these
are animals, so
conversations.
fuck you.
Right. That's always what happens in these conversations is someone makes a claim and you're like, well, in order to us to adjudicate the claim, you have to go down some side quests that can take
Right.
you away from the main quest area, unfortunately. So
You have to be artful at making distracting claims so that you can. That's the way to get people off your scent.
right.
You move off of the Nazi question because you just make a wild claim, right?
There you go.
Clouds are made of cotton candy.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, you want to argue about that?
Renora Zorro's here for $20, says, according to the last Sunday stream, Adam loves drawing limbo rings. Why did all of Sitch's waifus have their eyes closed on the comic cover then? Could it be Adam actually dislikes drawing eyes like how new artists hide hands? Sus. Is that true? They all had their eyes closed?
No, I mean, I don't know.
They obviously all had their eyes closed because they were tired because I wore them all out, Renoro. That's obviously why they had their eyes closed.
On that cover, they're all in bed having sex. So I think
it was post coitus, all right? They were sleepy, that they're all sleeping.
But it's hard for me I'm going to have to look now because it's hard for me to imagine that there's absolutely no one on that cover with their eyes open, but it could be.
Right.
You might have found something interesting, something unique and special.
I did not listen. I did not Cosby any of them. Zero fucks. All those women on the cover came of their own accord. They all wanted a piece of the Shadow Man. All right. Did you see how ripped my abs were on that cover?
They're all making the sex face. That's why they have none of their eyes are open. But yeah, you are correct. Oh wait,
right.
There's the girl with the eye patch. One of her eyes is covered up with the eye patch, so she might have one eye open under there.
There you go.
No, I think she is looking to the side, but just at the angle, you can't see her eye.
Right. My eyes are open.
Look at this. Of course, but you don't have limbo rings. You have the worst limbo ring game.
That's true, and yet I somehow got all those women, even with my terrible non-existent limbo rings. Okay,
right.
My
you realize this is fiction, right?
Listen,
I knew
that cover is based on a true story. Okay,
this cover here.
Yeah,
I knew most of our audience. I know how they answer the POV question, so I'm like, okay, I know how to satiate the POV question here.
Sitch with eyes wide open.
That's hilarious.
His eyes uncovered. Yes. Okay. Brian for $20. Thank you, Brian. Says, I don't think morality can be found in science because of the is-ought problem. Science can explain past behaviors and how it may have helped them, but it can't say anything about present and how it can affect the future.
The past is fixed though. And you can, if you devise an experiment, and look, they do this shit in computers now with game theory, right? If you come up with a different moral rule set, and pit it against another group of people with a different moral rule set, and one of those people thrives and the other one doesn't thrive. How is that not objective data that you've uncovered, right?
Well, it depends. When you talk about what you're talking about and how that relates to the whole is-ought conundrum, is it goes back to what I said of you can't make an objective normative claim of morality unless you know either A, what happens when you die, or B, what the point of life is. Unless if you knew the answers to those questions objectively, then you could say we have an objective framework of morality to achieve those goals. But we don't.
Those only matter though if your sole motivation is to live forever. Right? Because then it becomes relevant.
No. It would be relevant regardless. if you knew if you objectively knew that there's a God and God says, here's a list of rules of how you should live. And if you don't live them, you're going to burn in hell forever. And if you do them, you're going to be rewarded in heaven forever. That's objective morality. Now, I guess you could say, well, why should you be concerned with that? You could just be, who gives a shit? You should just live however you want to live and go to hell. I would say, I don't think most people want to. Obviously, everyone's not going to want to experience that. And you would say God designed humans to not want to experience that. So that is where the objective morality comes in from.
People don't mean objective. This is a problem with the word objective. People mean universal. They don't mean objective.
Right.
Objective in science means something completely different.
Okay.
Objective means not
Objective
subjective. It's the same for
Yeah.
It's the same result no matter who is fucking looking at it, right?
Yes.
Universal is something different.
Yes.
Well,
Existing in
there
all
is some overlap,
circumstances.
obviously.
Right.
Yes.
Well, yes, an objective fact that, if I drop, a coin off a building, it's going to fall at the same speed, every time, right? It's an objective because of this, of how gravity works. But then it's not universal because if you're on a different planet, it's going to fall at a different speed.
Correct.
It's different gravity, right?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I understand that. But usually when people
Perfect example.
right. But people mean both. They do mean universal morality in terms of that there's some sort of moral framework that fits all situations. But I'm arguing both because I'm saying if you knew that there was an afterlife and you knew that there were rules to get there and you knew that your soul was going to spend eternity there, your time on a physical plane, regardless of whatever situation you're in, would be minuscule compared to the infinity eternity you're going to spend. So you should be working towards the eternity. You shouldn't be working towards whatever you're doing in this very small segment of your existence.
Of course, but all that does for me is set up a motivational system that is very powerful in inspiring people to live by whatever the rules are that the society carves out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
You're motivating people who generally want to break rules to abide by the rules is half the battle, right? That's why I think separating it out into the enforcement system and what the actual rules are is important, because a lot of people often are arguing about the enforcement system when the actual rules of the system are very important, right? Obviously, we have lots of rules around property and killing each other and all these different things.
Okay. Right.
I just when you're saying science can't tell you anything about morality, there's a lot of different things that someone could be saying, right? I think sometimes people are saying in a particular situation, like the example of lying to the Nazis, right? Science can't tell you what to do in that situation because it's too complex. It's a social situation. And you don't really know what the outcome's going to be. Obviously there's two moral rules in conflict there. You're not supposed to lie, but you're supposed to save human life when you can. So you've got a conflict of rules. There are all these different situations, right? If you're talking about that, if you're talking about it from that one interaction situation, I think you've got some validity to saying science can't tell us anything about it. Although I do think science ultimately can tell you something about that situation. The reason why we engage in all the narrative and hypothetical stuff that we do is because we're trying to learn about that situation, right? And we are trying to learn tangible, objective things about the situation. But if you zoom all the way out and look at, well, what really is the purpose of morality? Why did it evolve? Why does it exist? Then you can do all kinds of things, and we're doing them all the fucking time. The reason why we keep track of GDP, the reason why we keep track of unemployment, the reason why we keep track of all of these different things is because we want objective measurements on how is our society thriving or fucking dying, right? Those are tangible measurements, scientific measurements that we're taking constantly.
Well, yeah, so Brian has a follow-up for $5, says, science describing the past is different from how we should live in the present for a better future. Science cannot explain how we should live now. Because I don't agree with that.
Because the future is unknowable. Yes.
Well, no, but
to some
also,
extent.
I don't agree with that, because if you or whoever is like, okay, this is my principle of morality. This is what I want to work towards. I want to work towards, getting to Mars. I want to work towards the most good for the most people, or, whatever.
Mhm.
The answer is that people generally give
Kill
in
all the
dinner and debate
hobos.
conversations. Kill all the hobos, right? Like, if you construct whatever the principle is, whatever the thing is you're working towards, that your moral system is working towards, I think you 100% could, in theory anyway, craft some sort of algorithmic process that's going to dictate what your behaviors would be in every situation. I think it's probably incredibly complicated to do that, and that's why we haven't done it yet. It's too complex. Maybe it won't be that complicated in the next 10 years with some AI. Someone could, shove their first principles into some AI and it could compute something, right? I don't know, but theoretically, it should be possible with some sort of scientific framework. So this could just be kind of a God of the gaps problem, where there's too much complexity in it for us to understand now. Doesn't mean it's always going to be that way.
Yeah. And then we'll prove Kant, or no, who did the Hume's guillotine? We'll prove Hume wrong, right? Hume's the one that's always saying. Guillotine? Hume came up with the is-ought gap. They call it Hume's guillotine because people are constantly saying the moral realm and the scientific realm are completely separated. I think it's good to conceptualize them as separated for a whole host of social reasons, the same way it's good to conceptualize a wall between church and state for a lot of social reasons, right? So, I don't necessarily think the same I don't think there is. I do think obviously religious views make their way into public life and vice versa.
Right.
But it's good to conceptualize it that way to try to avoid there being any sort of one religion takeover of government, which is really, I think, why people are doing it.
I think that to go back to the question for a second, I think, at least my understanding, the is-ought problem, is different than the past, present, future problem. The past, present, future problem, I believe, is solved by what I'm saying. It's very complex. The is-ought problem relies on having information about the purpose of life. And this is the fact that we don't have the information is what creates the is-ought problem, is that you have some sort of statement about what is. How do you make the logical leap to what ought to be? Because the ought is going to be some sort of, at least on some level, some subjective process, right? That's sort of the is-ought. That's the way you think of the is-ought. You're jumping from a description of reality to how something ought to be. The ought is based on your subjective whim to some extent, or the subjective whims of society or religion or whatever.
Isn't avoiding suffering a good substitute for a goal?
According to who, right? Isn't that the problem? It's like according to what? It's subjective.
Anyone who doesn't think that, I mean, we can just off them like immediately. Okay. If you're gonna say we shouldn't avoid human suffering, then let's just give them what they want, right? Fucking human suffering.
Sure, and obviously on a practical level, most people, we just assume that, right? We're fine bridging that gap because we're like, yes, most people, we as humans value our own human life above all other species' lives, or at least most people do.
Even in all,
is more, important. So we're trying to create a better world for ourselves where there's less suffering for ourselves as humans.
Why do people reject this? I mean, it oftentimes seems like they're doing it just to be dicks, because all of our politics revolves around people suggesting if there's some change made that it will result in suffering. Someone's going to suffer. This person's going to suffer. Society's going to collapse. Everyone's going to suffer. We're all going to fucking die. Right. So you can infer that that's what they're trying to do, is minimize human suffering. Right.
Right.
I think in the other side of the equation, maximizing human flourishing or thriving,
right,
I think that's more difficult. That's where you get more conflict. And what exactly is that, right? I want to go to Mars. You just want to have healthcare, right?
Right.
But the suffering, I think there's a lot more agreement on, right?
Yeah, it's usually easier.
What
Well,
is
the more
human suffering?
extreme you
Yeah.
get, the easier it is to paint the picture, right? Because someone
Yeah.
might try to make the claim that, not having healthcare as a human right is suffering or whatever, right? Someone might say, well,
Sure.
not being able to compete in a hierarchy is suffering, right? So yes, as you get closer to the middle, things
Boy,
start to get murkier.
you're. I mean, I would call that kind of the midway point. What I'm talking about
That's what I'm
is
saying. As you get closer to the middle point, things get
okay.
confusing,
Yeah.
right?
That makes sense.
Yes, the extremes are pretty
When
clear,
you're
and most people can point them out. So there's a there. I think when you have these conversations, I mean, I don't think most people. Well, it depends on the context. I don't think most people bring up the Izot thing or the subjective nature of human thriving necessarily to be dicks. I think we all agree on, in politics when we're having these conversations, like we're not, we all kind of understand what everyone's talking about. We all have a general agreement to some extent on what thriving and suffering looks like. It's just when you try to get into these like deeper philosophical conversations about like, can science explain morality, or is there such a thing as objective universal morality, all these other things, then you sort of do have to get into the very like hyper autistic specific breakdown of like what these terms mean and the subject, what is exactly subjective and what is not subjective.
There's an ego component too, I think, to this. When you start talking about the subjective and objective morality, because I think a lot of people conceptualize it as, oh, if I disagree, if my goal for society is some crazy goal that nobody agrees with, all of a sudden I have veto power over all of morality, even if there pretty much is a consensus among most people.
Well, no, because there's a, but yeah, but it depends. Like if you say like, if I drop a coin off the top of the skyscraper, it's going to fall to the ground at the same speed. No one has a veto power over the speed of gravity. It's just going to be what it is. It's an objective fact, right? And so I think that's what we mean when we say it's objective versus subjective. No one can veto the speed of gravity.
Right. Yeah. The thing about it though is, I mean, when you're talking about the rules of a game, I like talking about it in emergent facts. I've used this.
We could
term
talk about
before.
like basketball, like what a 3-point shot in basketball is an objective fact. We created it, right? So you could say even though humans created is an objective fact that there's a line. This line exists a specific distance away from the basket. You have to score it from beyond this line to make a 3-point shot, right? So it's an objective fact.
I was thinking
to some extent.
Also in terms of like the value of gold. The value of gold, you might think it's worth something different than me, right? Because you're super into gold and I'm not so much into gold, right? But when you make a market for gold, a fact emerges, right? The price of gold per ounce each day. And it changes as that market evolves. But to say that that gold, the price of gold, I mean, you're saying objectively, this is the amount of money of ounce of gold just traded for in the last trade. That's what you're saying.
You'd say the market,
but to say that is subjective, that thing that just happened, I mean, you're in crazy town.
Well, no. You wouldn't say. So what you would say to kind of get around this is kind of what you allude to. You'd say it is objective fact that the market values an ounce of gold to be X amount of dollars, right?
And that is a consensus process.
That is a consensus process. The market, by definition, is a consensus process.
Now, does anyone in that process have a veto power?
To some extent, they could. Only if you have one person who's rich enough to change the price of gold, themselves, right, by destabilizing the markets.
If they control that,
certain commodities.
If they control that much, yeah, definitely.
Yes, right. Yeah.
So if you map that onto the one person with the niche moral framework, right? They're not that person with all the fucking gold, right? Unless perhaps you're the Pope or something.
Sure, but it's harder to, I understand what you're saying, but it's harder to sort of map morality, which is far more ephemeral or etherical or whatever the correct word is, onto
it's not as soon as you make
a market
codify it into
like,
law,
like gold.
As soon as laws become part of the rules, it's no longer ephemeral.
Ethereal. Ephemeral is the wrong word, but
Is ephemeral? No, ephemeral.
ephemeral
works.
means lasting for a long time.
Does it?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
I mean, like
Ethereal. That's what you
ethereal.
mean.
Yeah, I mean like ethereal. Yeah, something that is not quite tangible. Okay. Yeah.
Mhm.
There's no moral marketplace. I know you could say like, well, there's a bunch of countries
There
that are
is
competing.
a moral marketplace.
I understand there's a bunch of countries that are
Holy shit.
competing.
What do you think we have elections for?
No, but it's not, as I said, it's not so clearly objective the way that the price of gold is. You can't type into the computer and say, what is the price of liberalism right now compared to monarchy? And there's like a number there, right?
The moral market just flipped from look the other way whenever you see illegal aliens to deport everyone you can find.
There you go. Well, actually, you know what? I take it back. You could use my own argument against me. You could say the only reason that we don't have a moral marketplace is because it's too complex for us to calculate at this moment. But you could theoretically, at some point, have some computer algorithm that is powerful enough to map on some numeric digit to these values and come up with a market, like a numerical marketplace of what moral systems are in the world at any given moment and how powerful they are. You could theoretically do that.
The immigration thing is perfect because everyone arguing their position on immigration is arguing that if you do it the way the other side wants to do it, it's going to be catastrophe. The economy is going to implode. Everyone's going to suffer. We're all going to fucking die. Right?
Right.
They are arguing the morality of the situation, right?
So, but we're just
super interesting.
This is all just Sitch's law, right? Because this is all just people defining objective differently.
Yeah, objective and subjective differently.
Objective, subjective, and universal, different terms.
Right.
Okay.
You do have to. This is the thing. I guess you could have a moral system where there is a caste system, but I think the moral intuitions of the population, you have to have a population of people who have very low moral intuition for unfairness, right? They don't detect unfairness anywhere to make a caste system work, because you're going to have two functioning rule sets, right? One for certain people and one rule set for another people. And there have been societies that have had a caste system before, but I think those societies are weaker, right?
Right.
They seem weaker to me. But I'm in the American context where everyone has, we're super hyper aware of unfairness. The caste system seems completely unfair. The kind of thing that we'd go riot in the street if existed here in America, right?
Well, the argument I guess you could make would be, if you could scientifically, definitively prove that
a caste system was better.
No, that unfairness is some sort of like form of biological moral motivator ingrained in people when they're born. And the caste system would seem unfair from a biological perspective to most people.
This is why it is so complex, because there's the moral players, right, who all have some level of veto in the fact that they can fuck shit up if they're not happy with the system, right? We've got that problem with socialism. So there's the players, the moral intuitions of the players are a factor. There is a social environment and the other moral systems with the other players going on competing, right? China wants to steal all our fucking IP and shit and outcompete us militarily and economically. So there's that outside force. And then there is the environment, which is just, is this possible? Can we make this work? With tragedy, the commons, all of these real life things that affect the functioning of the moral system that you put together. Enforcement rules, like enforcement ability. This is why God is such a good thing, because it's such an inexpensive way to enforce rules. If people believe God is going to punish them, then they're going to mind the rules themselves. If they don't believe God is going to punish them, then we need a bunch of police officers that are going to bang heads if they break the rules.
Right. Okay. Oh, just as someone in the chat pointed out, thank you. I think I said ephemeral meant long lasting. Is the opposite. Ephemeral means short, something that happens very quickly.
Oh, okay.
And then blinks out.
Right.
Okay. Lucy Lumberg, thanks so much for the 5 gifted memberships. And PC, thanks so much for the 5 gifted memberships. And thank you, JMac, our surrogate father, Daddy JMac, for the 50 gifted memberships. And I believe Thursday on Death of a Franchise on our other channel.
No, I thought we were doing the 0 one on Thursday. The not live one.
No. We're doing, okay, it's a minor understanding. We're doing the D&D session, I believe. This is what we're trying to do. Maybe we'll discuss it. I believe what we're trying to do is we're going to do D&D on the other channel, Death of Franchise channel, between me, you, Rags, and Dev, and JMac will GM, and we're going to do that on Thursday. Well, I guess we'll do it at the same time.
Yeah, but we're not. Look, maybe we're incorrect on this, but I read the same DMs you read, and I was under the impression that we were going to do a quick 0 session that's not going to be
that
live.
Was supposed to be before Thursday.
Yeah, but Dev said he can't do it on before Thursday. So is he not going to do the 0 session?
Well, I don't know, man. I don't think we should postpone the whole thing just because, like, if the 3 of us can do the 0 session and Dev can just jump in or something, I think that would make more sense.
That's
yes.
Okay. Sure. That works.
But we'll figure it out. So anyway, if we're not here on Thursday, go to the other channel if you want to listen to
we'll
us
post
play D&D. We'll post
something
a message
too.
or a note or something. Yeah. Okay. Armagad for $2 says you should go over Tim Dillon's CNN interview. I should watch that. That didn't make the rounds. Someone talked about it last Sunday. I forgot. So yeah. Okay. Let me add this to the queue of things to watch. The Tim Dillon interview. Okay. Sketch for $5 says maybe if we adopted more Bible stories like Prince of Egypt did, actual religious interest would still be popular among the youths. Yeah, maybe. I mean, everyone likes Prince of Egypt. Prince of Egypt is great. It's probably like the best. The Passover story is probably the best biblical story, which is why it always gets, readapted and everything. So, but yeah, I guess you could do it for the other stories.
Passover. That was God's just as conscience, right? He didn't come down. I guess he was the conscience of the king because the king was one that told him.
Well, no, I mean, God literally sent plagues, including the angel of death, to go fucking murder people or murder babies. So, pretty intense stuff. It's kind of funny. Why don't all the far left people that want to advocate for terrorism and want to advocate for attacking and killing civilians? Why don't they use the Bible as a justification? Because that's literally what God does in the Passover story, right? They say, because the king has some bad political policy of having the Jews be slaves, all the civilian Egyptian infants, firstborns, I guess not infants, the firstborns are all going to be murdered.
They hate conservatives and conservatives like the Bible. So that's why they don't do it.
That'd be an interesting thing for them to bring up. TL1524 for $5 says, gentlemen, we have the perfect moment of time. The stars have aligned. World peace can be achieved by Adam and Sitch reviewing Lilo and Stitch. Well, you're in luck, TL152, because we already did that on Sunday. We already talked about it for about a couple hours. I don't want to say I'm going to make a video.
Hours.
I don't want to say I should make a video on it. Sam really wants me to make a video every day. She grabs I wake up in the morning and she grabs my face and she says, when are you making a fucking video? PSA Sitch. Okay.
You should do it.
I do have a lot to say about Lilo and Stitch. So we should put all those thoughts into a video.
I did start rewatching it. Oh God, it is so much better.
Yeah, isn't it?
Even Hollywood is a bunch of fucking pussies now. I don't know why if they did get Vig Rhames to play Bubbles. Oh, it would have been just so much better. It would have been cool. And there's nothing in that movie that's
cool.
Look, Stitch is cool. They did do good with Stitch, but even Stitch, he's not in the movie that much. I mean, obviously the human characters completely take over, and in the original it's far more Stitch. Stitch is a real protagonist.
He's the protagonist of the original.
Yeah.
He's the one that has the character. Yeah.
So many fuck ups. Yeah.
Also, there's that scene that's very funny to me that always sticks out in my mind when when I don't know if you got to that part yet, where Bubbles shows up again to check on Lilo, and Stitch throws the book at his face, and it knocks his sunglasses off, and he gets all pissed off, and he puts them back on, and like the lens just falls out.
I haven't seen it yet.
Okay.
No.
So I just like this stiff. I just love that Stitch just chucked a book at the man's face. Just pegged him right in the face with a book.
Yeah. But you should do a video. Listen to Sam.
Yes.
That'd be
I
great.
should.
You could,
Right.
people would freak out. A Sitch video, it'd be the second coming for a lot of people.
No. Negative Socks for $2 says, please ask to be on the next EFAP. It's on Lilo and Stitch. Oh, that's interesting.
Oh,
Maybe.
okay.
Death by Sloth for $2 says, look into the magic number 7 plus minus 2. It explains a lot. I've never even heard of this. 7 plus minus 2? The magic number? The magic number, 7 plus minus 2. Some kind of article. Okay, I'll check it out. Let's see. It is often interpreted to argue the number of objects an average human can hold in short-term memory. This is occasionally referred to as Miller's Law. Oh, I'm really bad at that. So I've learned all the little tricks. You know the little tricks to like hold numbers specifically in short-term memory? You have to hold different subsets of numbers in different ways. So some of them you remember like visually, some of them you remember auditorily, some of them you remember like directionally, if that makes sense.
Yeah, who cares?
Like
Why
you can hold. Okay, well, excuse me.
Why?
Because sometimes you're playing a video game and you got to like remember a bunch of like random numbers or some shit. And you're too lazy to like write them down. So
I just pull out my camera and
okay. Look at this.
I do that a lot.
Right.
Captures it with a date and everything. Then I'm looking back. I'm like, oh yeah, I remember playing that game. That was fun.
Eric Diota for 10 Canadian. Thanks so much. Says Jordan Peterson's grandkids. Grandpa, is Santa real? Jordan Peterson. Well, what is real?
Oh,
that's pretty funny.
So frustrating.
Yeah, that's going to be an interesting conversation for the kids around the table. Jordan Peterson talking about Santa and the Easter rabbit.
And the Easter rabbit.
Yeah.
Nobody calls it a rabbit. They'll call it a bunny. What are you doing?
Excuse me. Okay, I'm Jewish. I don't know the code phrases you use. The Easter bunny, not the Easter rabbit. What's the difference? What's the difference between a bunny and a rabbit?
What's a bunny and a rabbit and a hare? What's the difference?
What's the difference? What is the difference? Aren't they the same thing?
Bunnies are for Easter, man.
Oh, okay.
I don't make the rules.
A bunny's not like a young rabbit, is it? What's the name for like a baby rabbit?
I don't know.
Baby rabbit name. Baby rabbit is called a kit. Oh. Or a kitten. Okay. There you go.
Same as a kitten?
Same as a cat. Well, no, or do you call all cats kittens? You don't call male cats kits. I've never heard that before. Stug for $2 says morality is just excitations of the Jungian field.
Oh, that's
there you go.
Yeah.
Excitation is the application of energy to a particle, object, or physical system.
Just like gravity waves.
I think that's what Jordan Peterson actually believes. I think that's what he actually believes. Yeah.
So he believes in a collective conscience.
I assume. I mean, he talks about the Jungian archetypes, which I think you'd have to believe in a collective unconsciousness to believe in the archetypes, right? If archetypes exist beyond just the idea that there's something that emerged.
I mean, there's two ways you can conceptualize collective conscience, though, that I think one is far more believable than the other.
Sure. I got too many tabs open. Brian, thanks so much, Brian, for the $20. Thank you. Says there could be a unifying truth to a moral structure, but multiple ways to express them. That different expression would alleviate the monoculture, I think. Yes. And I think that would align with what I was saying, where like there could be some unifying truth, but it has to be expressed differently depending on the environment at a different time period. Yes.
Yeah.
And then Brian also says, Sitch, I'm pretty sure God was thought of as formless in the Jewish faith, and that any words that would imply a form as a metaphorical language, they believe God is completely incorporeal. See, that's what I thought, because that's what I was raised to think. You know, when I went to Sunday school and all this other stuff, when I went to my Jew classes, it was always like God is not a physical being, and there's no like, face of God and all this other stuff. But then I don't know, because I remember when I would, because my grandfather was like very into like understanding, ancient Jewish history and how the thoughts of religion came to form. And when I looked into this stuff and researched it myself, my interpretation was that no, the Jews literally back in the day, not now obviously, but back in the day, Jews literally thought God was like a dude, and that's why there are passages in the Bible that were written that way. I think part of the thing with the Bible is that you have a collection of different stories from different tribes, which all became the Jews, kind of merged together and then are sort of rewritten many times over like thousands of years or whatever, some massive process. So you get these that's why I think you get these inconsistencies in the Bible. It's not like it wasn't really originally written as one narrative framework from start to finish. But that's just my understanding. Because if that was the case, the Jews thought that Jews always thought God was incorporeal. I don't know why they would say man was made in God's image. And then on top of that, Jews would say it would be blasphemous to draw pictures of humans. Then that doesn't really make sense to me, but I could be misinterpreting it. C.S. Paffy for $5 says, if you're going to be a liar, then it's good for you to purposely get caught lying about small things so people falsely believe you to be a bad liar. There you go. Look at that. That's very devious. Yeah. That's very devious.
I like it.
Ryan Wolf for $10 says, Wes Huff would have been better for this debate. You guys should have Carl and James Lindsay on together on a Sunday show. They can discuss liberalism and the woke right. I mean, I would love to have Carl and
James Lindsay are not going to be any stream together ever.
Yeah, yes. I don't think that was going to be agreed upon. They had a conversation that was cordial. It didn't really get as deep as I wanted to, and then it was fine. But then they had a big Twitter fight afterwards, so I don't think they're going to interact with each other.
I did do some. I was rereading Cynical Theories, James Lindsay's book, and I mean, they define wokeism in that book as critical social justice. Okay. I don't see how you can say critical social justice is a component of the right.
Okay, well, I don't want to get into the whole conversation again. But.
No, I don't want to get into the conversation again, but I do think that you have to massively reinterpret that book to buy any of the arguments that James Lindsay is making now. So
I disagree.
Okay. I think massive contradictions exist if you do this. So, but I was doing some typing, writing them out, and I'll make that argument in the future when we have more time.
Cool.
And I'll point to the specific contradictions.
Okay. Awesome. And we'll go through the text. Okay.
Yes.
Well, what do you mean? What do you mean by contradiction, Adam?
Mm-hmm.
Lethal Strain for $5 says, for science to prove God doesn't exist, it has to start with the premise that they might find God, and no scientist will ever do it. I don't know if I agree with that. There's got to be a lot of scientists out there that do believe in God. I don't think that's super uncommon. So,
what is I guess the problem here is that you don't know, nobody can tell the future. Is that what's standing in the way? There's this kind of prediction quality that bringing God into the equation gets past.
Are you reading? Wait, are you reading Brian's or Lethal Strain? We already talked about Brian's, which was the future thing.
Right. Well, I think it applies here as well.
Oh, does it?
Yeah. You just read the $20 one, right?
No, I read Lethal Strains for $5 for science to prove God doesn't exist. It has to start with the premise they might find God, and no scientist will ever do it.
Okay. I'm talking about a different thing then.
Yeah, that was the one we talked about. Anyway. J-Mac or Circuit Fire for $20. Thanks so much. Says the dwarven city-state of Taraz-Booth-Oo has a caste system of kobold serfs forced to do the mining manual labor. Well, that's fine, because we all know kobolds aren't people and don't deserve rights. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Fondue for 38 months says, didn't the Pharaoh do it first? It's the reason Moses had to be smuggled out by a river. That is true. The Pharaoh did kill according to the story, a bunch of the firstborn Jews, like 20 years ago or however old Moses was. So yeah. Now I don't know why would that from a moral system we would say that doesn't justify, just because a king, a tyrant did that wouldn't justify all that king's subjects that they don't have control over, especially as a king, it's not even a democracy, all of their children being wiped out. I think we all agree that doesn't seem very moral, but it's the Bible. Brian for $5 says, Hollywood sucks now. Now I look for indie productions like Neon and foreign movies. It's unfortunate, but true. That's why anime's popping off so much, probably. Metalworks 411.90 for $5 says, I know it's a lot to ask, but I really want to talk to you guys about religion and liberalism on the show sometime. Sure. Just DM Adam. Say, Adam, set aside.
He probably already has.
Okay, do it again. Do it until he responds.
Well, look, I mean, I'll book people to come on. Someone was saying we should have Ace on because Ace has seemed to go through a massive transformation in our chat. So
right.
And he DMs me from time to time, so we could have him on.
Sure.
I'm down to mix it up.
Ryan Uhl for $5 says, check out Labyrinth of the Demon King. I'll check it out. That sounds cool. Sketch for $5 says, speaking of woke right, how about that clip of Distributus telling Joel Berry about how he wants to burn down the Constitution with Christianity? I did see that, and maybe we will clip that. We'll watch that at some point. It is pretty crazy. There is this conversation with Benjamin has Distributus and Joel Berry on, and Distributus is doing the thing I always said he did. Remember in our second conversation with him where I got fed up and I'm like, you're just hiding your power level. You're just not answering these questions honestly because you'll look bad. And apparently now he feels confident enough, the quote woke right or whatever you want to call them, right? The far right has gained enough power that he feels more confident to just say like, yes, he wants to burn down the Constitution with Christianity. So
I think authoritarian right is the right term.
Maybe. Yeah.
He has always been an authoritarian. He has always been the type of person that thinks I am morally superior than everyone else and everyone should live by my rules or they're a fucking degenerate. And I'm willing to enforce my rules by putting a boot on your neck. He's always been that kind of person.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I guess it should have been obvious because isn't that part of I don't know enough about distributism to even know what it really means. So except that it means some sort of some external elite class is distributing economic resources via some sort of market.
Oh, really? Hilarious.
Yeah.
He is an elitist.
It's like, it's kind of my understanding. I don't know. This could be completely wrong. My understanding is it sounds sort of like a economic socialism, but through a Catholic framework where like the church is making sort of decisions about economic ownership and things of that nature. Squeeze Louise for $5. Yeah. Squeeze Louise for $5 says, these Parker and Dean debate bro characters have reached a level of irritating that Destiny and Hassan can only ever dream. There you go.
Oh, okay.
I don't know who Parker and Dean are. Was those the people that were talking to Jordan Peterson?
They might have been, yeah.
I'm unfamiliar with every single person in that video, except for Jordan Peterson, obviously. Dr. Diller for 38 months, thank you so much, says, this conversation is not conductive to doing seriously Slayer tasks. Please keep that in mind for all future discussions. Shaking.
We need to dumb it down? Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Sometimes I do listen to stuff while I'm doing other things, and I realize I'm not really fucking listening.
It's just too complicated to listen to. Yeah. Yes, that's true. That's a good point. Zokai for $2 says, thank you. Says, I recall reading what the Bible had to say about slavery on Genesis. You had to treat your slave well, which was a novelty for its time, that if your slave lost an eye, you must let them be free. There you go. Bible was better than most.
How many slaves gouged out one eye just to get that deal?
Yeah, there you go. Other Nonsense for $2 says, well, what is a super chat? It depends on the base presuppositions of what we believe to be a chat and super. I'm not so sure at all what you find. You'll find it useless. You read Dos Dostoevsky in the belly of the whale. Thank you.
This is hilarious. Metalworks has already DM'd me, and I can see
There's like a bunch of
from February 5th.
Yes. Yes.
I said, we can't do it this week. Check with me next week.
You just got to keep messaging. Just annoy us till we respond.
I'm so fucking bad.
Yeah, I know. We're both really bad at it.
If there's something like today, we didn't really have anything that we wanted to cover. I mean, I saw this and I thought this would be good to cover. So, but I mean, we could have covered this on Thursday. I guess we're not really.
We're doing the game on Thursday, probably. So.
Yeah, maybe. We'll see.
We'll see.
But yeah.
Asafartsi for $6 says when Jordan Peterson argues about lying, he's not talking about people under the Nazis. He's talking about people who lie today, pretending they're saving lives in a Nazi Germany. That's why he calls the question a game. Yeah, I understand what you're saying. I understand that position. But if he's making some sort of like maximal sounding claim about what it means to lie, I think it's fair to challenge that. If someone's making some sort of ultimate universally objective claim, I think it makes sense to challenge it in an extreme circumstance.
Well,
right?
An argument you could make is obviously the moral imperative is very clear in the Nazi situation, but there are situations where people might persuade themselves that lying is the right thing to do when it's really not the right thing to do.
Exactly.
So
exactly.
the complexity of the situation is not always
clear.
Yeah, exactly. The complexity of the situation makes things unclear. And I don't necessarily want to say, yes, sometimes lying is justified, when I think a lot of people might take that as a license to lie in situations where it's really not justified. That would be a good argument to make.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, he didn't even need to get suckered down that pathway, because the guy brought up the argument. It didn't really contradict his point anyway.
No, not at all.
At all. So, Magor for 2 hours says, I don't think Jordan Peterson has exactly been trying to make people more religious. I think he's more so built a bridge to connect the Christian spiritual framework to the material framework using NY, all of secular society.
I agree. Yeah. That's my perspective.
Maybe. I think he needs to answer this question. It's always going to come up a million times. And it just seems weird that it's not answered.
Weird.
We all assume we know why it's not being answered. But
right. Yeah. But I would like to really know why it's not being answered.
I don't think it would.
I'd like to ask him about my hypothesis.
Right. If he just said he was an atheist for Christian, or he said he was a new age woo-woo for Christian, I don't think it would really affect his ability to talk about what he's talking about or the audience or anything. I don't think it'd have any negative impact whatsoever. I don't think anyone cares. Okay. I mean, look at Trump. Trump is the biggest. Is anyone really think Trump is religious? They would really buy that Trump is some religious Christian.
I don't know his audience well enough to be able to answer that.
Okay.
It may have a huge impact. It might cut his audience in half. For all I know.
Right.
Because I don't know the dynamics of his audience. He's doing all this religious. He's doing a 10-part religious series on Daily Wire now, which has got it. He's massively in bed with the believers now.
Mm-hmm.
So it could be a giant hit. I don't know how you could say he could just come out and say, "Oh yeah, really, I'm an atheist." I mean,
I don't know. Doesn't that make
his career?
I don't know if I agree. I think it'd be even more powerful if you're listen, I so believe in Christianity and the Bible that even as an atheist, I support it.
I don't think you can know without knowing more details about his audience.
I guess you're right. Yeah. That's fair. I'm just saying I would speculate. I don't think it'd be that damaging. I think it's more damaging.
You're speculating, on his audience.
I'm speculating purely on vibes here. I think that these conversations where he can't answer the question clearly and everyone kind of perceives it this way, I think is more damaging than whatever the actual answer would be.
Yeah.
So, or you just be like Trump. What was Trump's answer? I'm trying to remember. Where they're like, "What's your favorite Bible verse?"
I was being sarcastic.
No,
All
no,
of
they,
them.
or yeah, he was like
All
all
of
of them. I
them.
know he gave some like terrible answer.
That's
and they
the
asked him,
best. That's the best answer. What are you talking about?
What's your favorite part of the Bible? The whole thing. It's like, oh, okay.
That is the. Oh yeah.
I
God,
can't.
that
I
made me
can't
like
choose.
Trump.
I can't choose. Every part of it's so wonderful. Okay, it's like saying you choose a favorite child. Who can do such a thing?
Did he really say the child
No,
thing? Because that.
he
Oh
did. No,
man,
I'm expounding. Okay,
that would be epic.
that would be pretty
that
good.
would bring it up a notch even.
Magor for $2 says, at any rate, I've gotten less religious the more I've listened to Jordan Peterson. I crossed the bridge the other way, and now I frame my spiritual practice in a loose materialism. That's interesting. That's interesting. Okay, well, there you go. Death by Sloffordre says, the reason I brought up magic number 7 is I believe that's why people use religion/ideology. Since you can only keep so many items in your short-term memory and attention, we need subconscious programs to follow or we go mad. Oh,
I agree. I totally agree with that.
I 100% agree with that. That's a very good point. That is a very good point.
This is based on the argument why it's just better to have a black and white rule around lying, because you're so rarely going to be in a situation where it requires the kind of complexity it requires with the Nazis. So
yeah, you could just, in that, I think if he just says that, that'd be a good answer.
It would be a good answer.
Except, well, I guess it kind of gets fucked up because if you're making some maximal or level statement about lying or something, about creating a reality or defining belief, or I forget whatever the phrase is that you use, kind of hinders that. But whatever. Anyways,
who cares?
Thank you all for coming. Thank you all for your incredibly generous donations. And if you want to listen to us probably play D&D, we'll see you all on Thursday.
Take care, everyone. Have a great day.
Have some energy. Bye.
Bye-bye.